My husband always forbade me from buying lottery tickets. He called it an idiot tax for the lower class. But while he was on a business trip, I secretly bought one for $2 and won $73 million. I decided not to tell him immediately. What happened the next day completely shattered my world and turned my jackpot into a weapon of survival. My name is Abigail. I am 34 years old, and I work as the general manager at a high-volume 24-hour diner right off the interstate in Ohio. If you have ever worked in the food service industry, you know the exact, unforgettable smell that clings to your skin and weaves itself into your hair. It is a stubborn, heavy mixture of fried potatoes, old cooking oil, and industrial bleach. I work 60 hours a week. I spend my days entirely on my feet, managing rebellious teenagers, covering shifts for sick line cooks, and dealing with angry customers who scream in my face over cold coffee or a missing side of toast. I come home every single night with my feet throbbing in cheap orthopedic shoes and my lower back aching so badly that simply bending over to untie my laces brings tears to my eyes. I am completely drained of life by the time I walk through my own front door. I do all of this, willingly and quietly, to support my husband, Rob. Rob is an elite loan officer at a prestigious regional bank. He is a man who builds his entire identity around the image of success. He wears tailored Italian suits that cost more than my monthly salary. He drives a pristine, midnight blue luxury sedan that I am terrified to even sit in, constantly worried I might leave a smudge on the immaculate leather seats. To his clients, his colleagues, and the church friends we see on Sundays, Rob is a pillar of success, charm, and financial literacy. To me, he is a warden. For the 7 years of our marriage, I have handed over every single paycheck I earn. Rob controls our joint bank accounts with an iron fist, managing the finances because, according to him, I simply do not have the intellectual capacity or the discipline to understand wealth accumulation. He scrutinizes every single grocery receipt I bring home. If I buy name-brand cereal instead of the generic store brand, I am forced to endure a 30-minute condescending lecture on fiscal responsibility and the compounding interest of wasted pennies. He constantly reminds me that my diner job is menial, a mere stepping stone for our household, while he builds our real empire. He conveniently forgets that I paid off his staggering student loans. He forgets that I worked double shifts, standing on my feet until my legs went numb, when he was just an unpaid intern trying to make connections. I sacrificed my own 20s, giving up any dream of going back to college so he could have a spotless credit score and a flawless resume. And yet, after all of that devotion, I have to beg for his permission just to buy a new pair of non-slip work shoes when my soles wear completely through to the floor. His most absolute, unforgiving rule was his ban on lottery tickets. He despised them with a passion that bordered on irrational. Whenever we stood in line at the local convenience store and someone ahead of us bought a scratch-off card, Rob would sneer. He would lean in and whisper to me that only pathetic, uneducated peasants waste their money on false hope. He called it a tax on the stupid. He made me swear I would never waste a single dime of his hard-earned money on something so incredibly trashy. And for 7 years, I obeyed him perfectly. I submitted to his rules. I desperately craved his love, his validation, and his respect, believing with my whole heart that if I just followed his strict financial dictates, he would finally look at me with admiration instead of that familiar, lingering disdain. The ultimate shift in my life began on a dreary, unseasonably cold Thursday afternoon. Rob was in our bedroom, meticulously packing his expensive leather weekender bag. He told me he was heading to Miami for a 3-day executive banking seminar. He stood in front of our full-length mirror, adjusting his silk tie, looking handsome, polished, and entirely out of my league. He walked over and kissed me on the cheek, a dry, obligatory peck that lacked any real affection. As he picked up his bag, he casually reminded me not to run the air conditioning too high while he was gone, because electricity is expensive, and I needed to be mindful of the utility bill. I stood in the hallway and watched his luxury sedan pull out of the driveway, feeling that deeply familiar, suffocating weight of being utterly alone in my own marriage. That night, my shift at the diner was a living nightmare. The industrial dishwasher broke down during the dinner rush, flooding the back kitchen with soapy, lukewarm water. 2 of my best waitresses called in sick at the last minute. I ended up washing dishes, serving endless tables of demanding travelers, and managing the cash register all at once. By the time I finally locked the heavy glass doors at 2 in the morning, my entire body was shaking with a bone-deep exhaustion. The rain was pouring down in thick, relentless sheets as I walked across the dark parking lot to my rusted 10-year-old sedan. As I reached into the deep pocket of my stained apron to find my car keys, my cold fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out and turned on the overhead dome light. It was a $2 tip left behind by an elderly, grumpy trucker who had practically thrown it on the table after complaining about his eggs. It was just 2 crumpled, grease-stained dollars. More importantly, it was $2 that Rob did not know about. It was entirely off the books. I started the engine and drove through the blinding rain, my windshield wipers slapping a steady rhythm. I stopped at a brightly lit, sterile gas station halfway home, needing to buy a cheap cup of black coffee just to keep my heavy eyes open for the rest of the drive. As I stood at the sticky counter waiting to pay, the bright, glowing neon sign of the Mega Millions display caught my eye. The numbers flashed in bright red lights. The jackpot was $73 million. I looked down at the crumpled $2 bill resting in my palm. I thought about Rob landing in Miami, probably sipping an overpriced cocktail at a hotel bar on the company dime. I thought about the holes wearing through my socks. I thought about the sheer humiliation of asking a grown man for permission to buy groceries. Standing there in the harsh fluorescent light, I experienced a sudden, inexplicable surge of pure defiance. For the very first time in 7 years of total submission, I wanted to do something strictly forbidden. I handed the board clerk the $2 bill and asked for a quick pick ticket. He handed me a small slip of thermal paper, completely unaware that he had just handed me my absolute salvation. The true conflict ignited the very next morning. I woke up shivering on the living room sofa, having been too exhausted to even make it down the hall to our bedroom. I was still wearing my diner uniform, which now smelled heavily of stale grease and sweat. The rain was still tapping a melancholy rhythm against the window panes. I dragged my aching body into the kitchen and brewed a pot of the cheapest generic ground coffee we kept in the pantry. I turned on the small television resting on the kitchen counter to watch the morning local news, a quiet routine to ward off the silence of the empty house. The morning anchor was smiling brightly, announcing that the winning Mega Millions numbers from the night before had been officially drawn. The banner across the bottom of the screen declared that there was one single winning ticket sold in the entire country, and it was purchased right here in Ohio. I chuckled bitterly to myself, taking a sip of my scalding, bitter coffee. I walked over to my purse slung over the dining chair, reached inside, and pulled out the small slip of thermal paper. I walked back to the screen, intending to throw the losing ticket in the trash immediately after. The anchor read the first number, 12. I looked down at my ticket. The first number printed was 12. A strange, funny little coincidence, I thought to myself. The second number was 28. I checked my ticket again. 28. My heart gave a tiny, irregular flutter in my chest. The third number was 34, my exact age. I looked down, my eyes widening. 34. The fourth number was 51. I stared at the paper. 51. The heavy ceramic coffee mug in my left hand began to shake uncontrollably. Hot, dark liquid splashed over the rim, burning my knuckles, but I could not register the pain. The fifth number was 68. I looked at the ticket. 68. The kitchen began to tilt sideways. The walls seemed to vibrate and close in around me. My breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid, pulling in thin gasps of air. The anchor smiled with practiced enthusiasm. "And the mega ball is 7. I stared at the final number printed on my ticket. It was a bold, dark, perfectly printed 7. The ceramic mug slipped entirely from my numb fingers and shattered violently against the hard linoleum floor, sending dark coffee splashing across the white cabinets. I collapsed to my knees right there in the spreading puddle of coffee and sharp, broken porcelain. The sheer shock was entirely visceral, striking me with physical force. It felt exactly as if a massive freight train had slammed directly into my chest. My knees buckled completely under the crushing weight of an impossible reality. I began to hyperventilate, gasping for air as the room spun wildly out of control. $73 million. The number was too astronomically large for my exhausted brain to process. It was more money than Rob could ever make in 10 lifetimes of his elite banking career. It was absolute freedom. It was power. It was an undeniable, permanent security that I had never known. I stayed on the wet floor for a very long time, my hands pressed tightly over my mouth to muffle the hysterical, tearing sobs escaping my throat. I cried until my ribs ached. When the initial suffocating wave of panic finally subsided, a fierce and primal protective instinct took over my body. I picked up the ticket with trembling, coffee-stained fingers, terrified of tearing the fragile paper. I knew immediately that I had to hide it. I could not leave it in my purse where Rob might snoop. I could not leave it in a drawer where he might conduct one of his random household inspections. I ran down the hallway to the hall closet and pulled down a heavy, dust-covered cardboard box filled with my late grandmother's belongings. Deep inside was her massive, leather-bound family Bible. Years ago, the fragile binding had split right down the middle, creating a deep, hidden crevice between the Old and New Testaments. I carefully, reverently slid the winning lottery ticket deep inside the hollowed-out section of the Bible, closing the heavy leather cover and burying the book securely back at the bottom of the box. I sat back on my heels on the hallway floor, my chest heaving, sweat dripping down my neck. My immediate thought, incredibly, was not of escape. I did not want to pack a bag, hire a lawyer, and disappear into the wind. Despite years of intense financial abuse and emotional neglect, my fragile mind was still deeply tethered to my marriage. I loved Rob. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the absolute perfect wife for him, molding myself into whatever shape he demanded. As I stared at the cardboard box hiding my $73 million secret, a foolish, desperate hope blossomed warmly in my chest. I wanted to call him. I reached for my phone, thinking about dialing his number in Miami and screaming the news into the receiver. I believed, with all my naive, damaged heart, that this immense amount of money would finally fix everything broken between us. I thought that if I handed him this ultimate glittering prize, he would finally stop looking down on me. He would finally see me as a true equal, a partner worthy of his respect. I imagined him rushing home, kissing me with real, burning passion, holding me tight and telling me that I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I truly thought the money would buy me the love and respect I had been starving for all these years. I stood up from the floor, wiping the tears from my cheeks, preparing to make the phone call that would change our lives together. I had absolutely no idea that my beautiful, hopeful dream was about to turn into the most terrifying nightmare of my life, and that the man I was so eager to bless was currently setting a trap to destroy me completely. I wiped my wet cheeks with the back of my hand and walked purposefully down the hallway toward the small spare bedroom we used as a home office. My mind was racing with 1,000 different ways to break the news of the $73 million jackpot. I wanted to surprise him with something tangible before I even made the phone call. I knew Rob still owed $42,000 on his luxury sedan. He complained about the high monthly payments every single time he sat down to pay the bills. I decided I would log into our joint checking account, find the exact payoff amount for his car loan, and tell him the debt was completely gone as my first gift to him. I sat down in the heavy leather desk chair and wiggled the mouse to wake up our shared desktop computer. The large screen flared to life, illuminating the dark room with a harsh white glow. I typed in our shared password and opened the web browser. Before I could even type the bank web address into the search bar, a small green icon bounded at the bottom of the screen. It was the messaging application. Rob had bought this computer 2 months ago and synced his phone to it so he could text from his keyboard while working at home. He usually logged out before he left for trips, but in his rush to pack for Miami, he must have forgotten. A notification banner slid across the top right corner of the screen. It was a new text message. I did not intend to snoop. I was just going to close the application so I could focus on the banking website. But my eyes caught the name attached to the incoming message. The contact name was saved as Brittany Jr. Realtor. I knew Brittany. She was a 24-year-old girl who had just started working at the real estate agency next door to Rob's bank. She had attended our neighborhood holiday party last year, wearing a dress that was entirely too short and laughing too loudly at every single joke Rob made. The preview of the message read, "I cannot wait to get back into the hot tub with you, baby." My hand froze over the computer mouse. The air in the room suddenly grew very thin. The joyous shock of winning the lottery evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold and creeping dread that crawled up my spine. I clicked on the message thread. The application expanded, filling the entire screen with months of unsynced text messages. The conflict shifted instantly from absolute joy to pure, unadulterated horror. The very first thing I saw was a high-resolution photograph Rob had sent her just 2 hours ago. It was not a picture of the sunny beaches in Miami. It was a picture of a snow-covered mountain peak seen through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a luxury resort suite. 2 crystal champagne flutes rested on a stone balcony railing. The caption Rob typed below the photo read, "Aspen is beautiful, but not as beautiful as you. I am so glad I lied about the banking seminar." My breath hitched in my throat. I leaned closer to the bright screen, my eyes scanning the endless chain of blue and gray text bubbles. I scrolled up, going back a few days, then a few weeks, then a few months. The betrayal was meticulous and continuous. Rob was not in Miami. He was at a luxury ski resort in Aspen with Brittany. I read a message Brittany sent last Tuesday. She wrote, "Do I really have to see your wife at the bank gala next month? I cannot stand looking at her cheap clothes." Rob replied 3 minutes later. He wrote, "I know, babe. I hate it too. She constantly smells like cheap cooking oil and industrial bleach from that disgusting diner. She is so exhausting. She has an absolute peasant mentality when it comes to money. She actually asked me if she could buy a new winter coat yesterday. I told her we were on a tight budget. I need her to keep paying all the utility bills with her diner tips so I can save up for our future." I slapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a physical gag. The room began to spin. I had worked double shifts all winter with a broken heater in my car, shivering my way to work every morning, just so he could hoard his executive salary. He had called me a peasant. He had mocked the very diner uniform that paid off his student loans. I gripped the edge of the wooden desk to steady myself and forced my eyes to keep reading. The texts grew darker and far more sinister the further down I scrolled. This was not just a secret romance, it was a calculated financial trap. I found a long block of text Rob had sent just yesterday afternoon, right before he packed his leather weekend bag. Brittany had asked him a question about a house. She wrote, "Did you figure out the down payment for the new house in the valley? The seller wants $80,000 by the end of the month, or we lose the property." Rob answered with a detailed, brutal plan. He wrote, I have it completely figured out. I am bringing the home equity line of credit paperwork home next week. I am going to tell Abigail it is for major home renovations. She is so desperate to please me, she never reads the documents I put in front of her. I will have her sign as the primary borrower." Brittany replied, "Are you sure she will sign it? What if she asks a lawyer?" Rob responded with a laughing emoji. He wrote, "Abigail does not even know how to balance a checkbook. I control every single penny in that house. I will force her to sign the HELOC under the guise of upgrading the kitchen. The bank will approve us for $150,000 based on the home value. Once the cash clears into our joint account, I will immediately wire the entire amount into the offshore LLC I set up in your name." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. A home equity line of credit. He was planning to take out a massive loan against the very house I had helped pay the mortgage on for 7 years. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning with unshed tears. Brittany wrote, "What happens after you wire the money to my LLC? Will she not notice the money is gone?" Rob wrote back, "By the time she logs in and notices the money is gone, it will be too late. The money will be legally protected under your corporate entity. The very next morning, I will serve her with the divorce papers. I will move out and leave her with the house. Because her signature will be on the primary borrower line for the HELOC, she will be legally responsible for paying back the entire $150,000 debt. With her pathetic diner salary, she will never be able to afford the monthly loan payments. The bank will foreclose on the house. She will be left with crippling debt and ruined credit, and we will be sitting in our brand new luxury home with a massive pile of cash." I stared at those glowing words until they burned themselves permanently into my retinas. He intends to drain the accounts, serve me with divorce papers, and leave me with crippling debt while he marries a 24-year-old junior realtor. The physical pain of the betrayal felt like a serrated knife twisting directly into my stomach. I pushed myself away from the desk, my chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a loud thud. I stood up and paced the small room, gasping for air. Every single thing I believed about my life was a meticulously constructed lie. The man I loved did not just want to leave me. He wanted to destroy me completely. He wanted to leave me bankrupt, homeless, and drowning in fraudulent debt so he could fund a lavish lifestyle with his mistress. I walked back to the computer screen. I did not cry. The tears simply stopped. The naive, devoted wife who wanted to buy her husband's love with a winning lottery ticket died right there in that small home office. A cold, hardened resolve took her place. I reached for the computer mouse. I knew I needed to secure this evidence immediately. If Rob realized his messaging application was synced to the home computer, he could delete the entire thread remotely from his phone in Aspen. I opened the print menu. I selected the entire conversation history with Brittany Junior Realtor. I clicked Print. The laser printer in the corner of the room hummed to life. I stood over it, watching the blank white pages slide out one by one, covered in black ink that documented my husband's ultimate betrayal. Page after page piled into the output tray. I read the texts again as they printed. I saw the dates, the timestamps, the photos of their hotel rooms, the receipts for expensive dinners he claimed were business expenses, and the step-by-step blueprint of his plan to leave me destitute. I gathered the warm stack of papers. There were 42 pages in total. I walked over to the filing cabinet, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slid the printed messages safely inside. I sealed the clasp tightly. I walked out of the office and stood in the quiet hallway. I looked toward the hall closet, where my late grandmother's heavy cardboard box rested on the top shelf. Buried deep inside that box, hidden within the split binding of the family Bible, was the small slip of thermal paper bearing the winning Mega Millions numbers. Just 20 minutes ago, I believed that $73 million ticket was a shared blessing. I believed it was the magical key that would finally unlock Rob's respect and affection. Now, looking at the closet door, the truth crashed down on me with terrifying clarity. The lottery ticket was no longer a shared blessing. It was my only shield in a war I did not even know I was fighting. If I claimed that money right now, Rob would legally be entitled to half of it because we were still married. He would take $36 million of my grandmother's blessing, marry his mistress, and laugh at my stupidity for the rest of his life. I could not let that happen. I would rather burn the ticket to ashes than let him touch a single penny of it. I walked into the kitchen and picked up a heavy trash bag. I began throwing away the shattered pieces of the ceramic coffee mug I had dropped earlier. I scrubbed the dark coffee stains off the white linoleum floor until my knuckles were raw and the tiles were spotless. I needed to erase every single sign of my shock. I needed the house to look exactly as it always did. Rob was coming home from his fake seminar in 3 days. He was going to walk through the front door, kiss my cheek, and hand me a stack of fraudulent loan documents. He thought I was a gullible, exhausted diner manager with a peasant mentality. He thought I would blindly sign my life away. He had absolutely no idea that I now held 42 pages of his secret life in a manila envelope, or that a $73 million shield was quietly resting inside a hollowed-out Bible down the hall. I threw the trash bag into the outside bin and washed my hands in the kitchen sink. The cold water ran over my skin, grounding me in the present moment. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My diner uniform was still stained with grease. My hair was tied back in a messy knot, but my eyes were completely different. The desperate, pleading look was gone. I dried my hands on a dish towel. I had 3 days to prepare for his return. I had 3 days to figure out how to navigate his trap, protect my winning ticket, and secure my own future. I did not know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Rob was going to pay for every single word he typed on that screen. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked, and the front door swung open, bringing a gust of humid air into the quiet entryway. Rob dropped his expensive leather weekender bag onto the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. He let out a long, exaggerated groan, rolling his shoulders as if he had just carried the weight of the entire world on his back. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, wiping my damp hands on my apron, forcing the corners of my mouth to curl upward into the familiar, eager smile I had practiced for 7 years. God, Miami was absolutely miserable, he complained, not even looking at me as he shrugged off his tailored suit jacket and tossed it over the back of the dining chair. The humidity ruins your clothes, and those seminar speakers were putting me to sleep. 3 days of listening to regional directors drone on about quarterly projections. I am exhausted. He finally turned his attention to me, walking over to press a dry, customary kiss against my right cheek. His skin smelled faintly of hotel soap and that expensive sandalwood cologne he only wore on special occasions. It took every ounce of physical restraint in my entire body not to recoil from his touch. The scent of him, the casual arrogance in his voice, the sheer audacity of complaining about a fake banking seminar when I knew he had been sipping champagne in Aspen with a 24-year-old realtor made my stomach churn violently. "I am so glad you are home, honey," I said, my voice soft and deliberately submissive. "I missed you so much. I have your favorite dinner ready." "Good, because hotel food is garbage," he muttered, loosening his silk tie and walking toward the kitchen island. I moved to the oven, pulling out the heavy cast-iron Dutch oven. The rich aroma of slow-cooked pot roast, carrots, and potatoes filled the room. This was the meal he always demanded after a trip. I carefully plated a large portion, ensuring he received the best cuts of meat. As I carried the steaming plate to the table, my hands began to tremble. The ceramic plate rattled slightly against the glass coaster as I set it down. Rob looked up, his brow furrowing in that sharp, critical way that usually sent me into a spiral of apologies. "What is wrong with you? You are shaking like a leaf." "I am just tired from the diner," I lied instantly, lowering my eyes to the floor. "We had 2 servers quit yesterday, and I had to pull a double shift. My arms are just a little weak today." "Well, you need to manage your staff better," he said dismissively, picking up his fork and knife. I cannot come home to a chaotic house when I am busy building our actual future. You have to step up, Abigail. We are a team, remember? A team. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I watched him cut into the tender meat, chewing methodically. I stood near the sink, pretending to wash a few pans, weaving the painful reality of my past into the present moment. I thought about the thousands of plates I had carried, the thousands of hours I had spent on my feet, smelling like stale grease, handing over every single tip to pay off his massive student loan debt. I had bought that tailored suit he had just tossed on the chair. I had funded the very foundation of his elite image. And now, he sat in the home I helped pay for, planning to force me into a fraudulent home equity loan so he could run away with a girl 10 years younger than me. The tension in the kitchen was suffocating. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of the 42 pages of printed text messages currently locked in a manila envelope under the floorboards of my car. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the boiling pot of gravy and throw it across the immaculate kitchen. I wanted to tell him I had $73 million sitting inside a hollowed-out Bible down the hall and that he would never see a single shiny penny of it. But I clamped my jaw shut. I breathed in slowly through my nose. I had to play the perfect, obedient victim. If he suspected even a fraction of a change in my demeanor, his trap would snap shut early, and I would lose everything. "Is the roast okay?" I asked meekly, wiping the spotless counter with a sponge. "A little dry, but it will do," he replied without looking up. "Did you sort the mail? I am expecting some important bank documents next week for those home renovations we talked about." "I left the mail in your study, just the way you like it," I answered, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I will make sure to look out for the renovation papers." He smiled around a mouthful of potatoes, a chilling, victorious smile. Good girl. The next morning, Rob left for the bank at 7 sharp, his hair slicked back, his briefcase in hand. The moment his luxury sedan turned the corner at the end of our street, I sprang into action. I called the diner and told the owner I was bedridden with a severe stomach bug. Then I changed out of my usual faded jeans and threw on a conservative navy blue dress I had bought years ago for a funeral. I needed to look presentable, but more importantly, I needed to remain entirely invisible. I drove 45 minutes out of our small suburb, heading straight into the heart of downtown Columbus. The city was a maze of towering glass buildings and blaring traffic. I navigated my rusted sedan into a dimly lit underground parking garage, feeling wildly out of place among the sleek black town cars and imported sports cars. I took the elevator to the 34th floor, stepping into the hushed, mahogany-lined reception area of Hayes and Associates. Mr. Hayes was a ruthless trust and estate attorney recommended to me by a fiercely loyal regular customer at the diner, an old retired judge who always praised my work ethic. Mr. Hayes did not handle petty family squabbles. He handled massive wealth protection, corporate dissolution, and aggressive asset shielding. When I was ushered into his massive corner office, the view of the city skyline was dizzying. Mr. Hayes was in his late 50s, wearing a sharp charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly trimmed. He did not smile when I walked in. He simply pointed to a heavy leather chair across from his vast walnut desk. "Mrs. Abigail Miller," he said, his voice deep and entirely devoid of warmth. "My old friend told me you were in a highly sensitive bind. Before you speak a single word, you will read and sign this non-disclosure agreement. It legally binds me to absolute secrecy regarding anything discussed in this room, and it protects you from any premature leaks of your financial status." I picked up the heavy gold pen he offered and signed the thick stack of papers. My signature looked small and fragile at the bottom of the page. Once the document was secured in his drawer, he folded his hands on the desk. "Now, tell me why a diner manager needs a high-level asset protection firm." I reached into my worn leather purse. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely undo the metal clasp. I pulled out a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a high-quality color photocopy of the Mega Millions ticket. I slid it across the smooth wood of his desk. Mr. Hayes looked down. He picked up his reading glasses, placed them on his nose, and studied the numbers. He looked at the date. He looked at the printed jackpot amount written in small text at the top. For a fleeting second, his stoic mask slipped, his eyebrows raising slightly. He set the paper back down. $73 million, he stated softly. Yes, I whispered, the reality of the number echoing terrifyingly in the quiet office. I bought it 3 days ago. Have you claimed it? No, it is hidden. No one knows, not even my husband. I reached into my purse again and pulled out the thick manila envelope containing the 42 pages of printed text messages between Rob and Brittany. I pushed that across the desk as well, and this is why he cannot know, I explained, my voice gaining a desperate edge. He is planning to force me to sign a home equity line of credit next week. He plans to steal the equity from our house, wire it to an offshore LLC in his mistress's name, and serve me with divorce papers. He wants to leave me completely bankrupt and entirely responsible for the new debt. Mr. Hayes opened the envelope. He read the first page, then the second. The silence in the room stretched on for several agonizing minutes. I watched his eyes scan the cruel, calculating words my husband had typed. The attorney closed the file, taking off his glasses. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingertips together. "You have quite the predicament, Abigail," he said, his tone shifting into a sharp, clinical focus. "Your husband is attempting a classic, albeit brazen, financial fraud. However, the fraud is the least of your current worries." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I mean, we need to discuss the terrifying legal reality of your lottery ticket," he said bluntly. "You reside in Ohio. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, meaning assets acquired during a marriage are generally considered marital property, subject to division upon divorce. Because you purchased this winning ticket while you are legally married to Robert Miller, he is legally entitled to pursue half of the prize. If you claim that $73 million today, your husband will walk away with $36.5 million of it." The air rushed out of my lungs. $36 million. The thought of Rob taking my salvation, taking the blessing that was supposed to free me from his abuse, and using it to fund his luxurious new life with Brittany, made me physically ill. The room spun slightly. I gripped the armrests of the leather chair to anchor myself. "I cannot let him have it," I gasped, panic rising in my throat. "I will burn the ticket before I give him a single dime. Can I just divorce him now? Can I file the papers today and claim the ticket next month?" "No," Mr. Hayes interrupted sharply, raising a hand to stop my panic. "Filing for divorce does not retroactively change the date the asset was acquired. The ticket was purchased during the union. The court will see it as a marital asset, regardless of when you file the paperwork. If you hide it during divorce proceedings and claim it later, that is asset concealment, which is a severe felony. The judge would likely award him the entire sum as a penalty for your fraud." I felt tears hot and frantic welling in my eyes. I was trapped. The golden key to my freedom was wrapped in a legal chain that bound it directly to my abuser. "Then what do I do?" I pleaded, staring at the ruthless lawyer who held my fate in his hands. "He is going to destroy me next week. He is bringing those loan papers home. I cannot survive this." Mr. Hayes did not offer pity. He offered strategy. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, unwavering intensity. "You are not going to be destroyed, Abigail, because you came to me before you made a mistake," he said, his voice dropping into a low, commanding register. "We cannot divorce him immediately, and we certainly cannot claim the prize yet. We have to execute a legally airtight post-nuptial separation agreement before you claim the prize, getting Rob to voluntarily waive his rights to all of your assets." "A post-nuptial agreement?" I repeated, confused. "Yes. It is a legally binding contract signed during the marriage that dictates exactly how assets and debts will be divided in the event of a divorce. We need Robert to sign a specific, ironclad document wherein he voluntarily and explicitly waives his rights to any and all of your undisclosed personal assets, accounts, and future claims. Why would he ever sign something like that? I asked, the sheer impossibility of the task weighing on me. He controls every penny. He scrutinizes my grocery receipts. He would never voluntarily give up his rights to anything I own. Mr. Hayes allowed a cold, calculating smile to touch his lips. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap being set. He will sign it if he believes your assets are actually toxic liabilities, the attorney explained smoothly. Greedy men are remarkably predictable, Abigail. They love money, but they are absolutely terrified of debt they did not create. Right now, Robert believes he is setting you up to take the fall for a massive home equity loan. He wants to saddle you with debt so he can walk away clean. We are going to use that exact psychology against him. I listened intently, my tears drying up as the sheer brilliance of the legal maneuver began to take shape in my mind. You are going to go back to that house, Mr. Hayes continued, tapping a finger on the desk. You are going to continue playing the exhausted, submissive wife. You will cook his meals. You will smile when he kisses your cheek. But behind his back, you are going to create a financial crisis so severe, so terrifying, that he will be the one begging for a separation of assets. You must make him believe that being legally tied to your finances will ruin his credit, ruin his future with his mistress, and destroy his pristine image at the bank. I nodded slowly, the strategy taking root in my chest. I had to become a liability. I had to become the danger. Once he is sufficiently terrified of your fabricated debt, Mr. Hayes concluded, he will bring his own aggressive lawyers to the table to force a separation agreement to protect himself. He will demand that document. And when he drafts the clause stating he wants nothing to do with your undisclosed assets, you will play the heartbroken victim and you will sign it. The moment the ink dries on that waiver, the $73 million belongs solely to you. He will have legally, voluntarily locked himself out of the vault. I sat back in the heavy leather chair. The trembling in my hands finally ceased. The fear that had paralyzed me since I found the text messages evaporated, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. The devoted wife was truly dead. I was now a soldier in a war of legal attrition. Tell me exactly what I need to do, I said, my voice steady and resolute. Mr. Hayes pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and uncapped his gold pen. First, we need to design your ruin. We are going to build a mountain of fake debt so convincing your husband will run screaming in the opposite direction. I rode the elevator down 34 floors in complete silence, staring at my own reflection in the polished brass doors. The woman looking back at me was still wearing a funeral dress and cheap black shoes, but she was no longer alone. I walked to my rusted sedan in the dim underground garage and sat behind the wheel for a long moment without starting the engine. In my purse were 3 things that could end my life if Rob ever found them: a signed copy of the non-disclosure agreement, a business card with Mr. Hayes' private line printed on it, and a single page of handwritten instructions written in the attorney's sharp block letters, listing exactly what I had to fabricate and exactly what I had to say when my husband found it. I could not bring any of it into that house. I drove out of the garage and pulled into the empty back lot of a closed hardware store on the edge of the city. I pried up the loose floorboard panel behind my driver's seat, the same hiding place where the manila envelope of printed text messages had been sitting for 3 days. I slid the folded pages in beside the envelope and pressed the panel back down with the heel of my hand until it clicked flush against the frame. Then I drove home with the windows down, letting the cold air scour the smell of that expensive office off my skin. I was standing at the sink peeling potatoes when Rob's headlights swept across the kitchen wall at 6:40. He came through the door talking about a difficult client, tossed his keys into the ceramic bowl, and stopped halfway across the room. He looked at my face a beat longer than usual. "You look flushed," he said. "Were you out somewhere today?" "I stayed at home," I answered, keeping my eyes on the potato in my hand. "The stomach bug from yesterday is still hanging on. I slept most of the afternoon." He studied me for another second, then lost interest and walked toward his study. "Good," he called back over his shoulder. "Get your rest tonight. The bank is couriering the renovation paperwork to the house in the morning, and I need your signature on it before the weekend. The contractor will not hold our slot forever." I set the peeler down on the counter. My hands were perfectly steady. "Of course, Rob," I said. "Just tell me where to sign." That night, I lay flat on my back in the dark, listening to my husband breathe beside me, running Mr. Hayes' instructions through my mind over and over like a rosary. Design the ruin. Make it look expensive. Make it look old. Make it look contagious. The very next day, Rob pushed a thick stack of documents across the kitchen island. The bold letters at the top of the first page read, "Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement." He tapped his expensive gold pen against the granite countertop. "Sign here, Abigail," he commanded, his tone brisk and entirely devoid of affection. "These are the renovation papers. The contractor needs the deposit by Friday, and I need your signature as the primary borrower to secure the best rate." The moment had arrived. The trap was set right in front of me. I stared at the signature line, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had to stall. I could not sign this fraudulent document, but I could not refuse outright without triggering his suspicion and ruining the post-nuptial strategy Mr. Hayes and I had devised. I reached out with a trembling hand, allowing my fingers to brush the pen before suddenly gasping loudly. I clamped my hand over my chest, my breathing becoming shallow and rapid. I forced my eyes wide, hyperventilating as I slumped heavily against the kitchen island. "Abigail, what are you doing?" Rob snapped, his annoyance immediate. "Just sign the paper." "I cannot breathe," I choked out, sliding down the side of the cabinets until I hit the floor. "Rob, my chest. It is so tight. The diner, the double shifts. I am having a panic attack." I curled my knees to my chest, rocking slightly, playing the exhausted, broken woman he expected me to be. Rob let out an exasperated sigh, clearly frustrated that my sudden collapse was delaying his meticulously planned theft. "For God's sake, Abigail, you are so dramatic," he muttered, grabbing his briefcase. "Fine, go lie down. I have a meeting with a client. I will leave the papers on the counter. You had better sign them before I get back tonight." He stepped over me without a single word of comfort, the front door slamming shut behind him. I stayed on the floor until the sound of his engine faded down the street, my chest heaving with real adrenaline. The stall had worked, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. I hauled myself up from the linoleum, my body aching with tension. I needed to move. I needed to retrieve my late grandmother's family Bible from the hall closet and check on the $73 million lottery ticket before executing the next phase of Mr. Hayes' plan. I walked down the hallway, the silence of the empty house pressing in on me. As I reached for the closet doorknob, the sharp, distinctive sound of the front door opening again froze the blood in my veins. "Rob?" I called out softly, panic rising in my throat. Had he forgotten something? Had he come back to force me to sign the papers right now? "Nope, just me," a shrill, entitled voice echoed from the entryway. It was Ashley, Rob's younger sister. Ashley was a 28-year-old aspiring influencer who had never held a steady job for more than 3 months. She was constantly broke, constantly asking Rob for loans he refused to give her, and constantly snooping through our house whenever she felt like it. "Ashley, what are you doing here?" I asked, walking quickly back into the living room to intercept her. "Rob is not home." "I know. I saw him driving out of the neighborhood," she said carelessly, tossing her designer knockoff purse onto the sofa. "I just needed to borrow a few bucks for gas, and maybe see if you had any cash lying around from your diner tips. You always hide it in weird places." My stomach dropped. Ashley had a terrible habit of hunting for loose cash. 2 years ago, she had stolen $300 from a jar in the pantry, and Rob had completely dismissed my concerns, telling me I had probably just misplaced it. "I do not have any cash, Ashley," I said firmly, stepping between her and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. "And I am really not feeling well. You need to leave." Ashley ignored me completely, her eyes darting around the room. She noticed the stack of HELOC documents resting on the kitchen island. She walked over, casually flipping through the pages. "Wow, 150 grand?" she whistled, a greedy glint in her eyes. "You guys are rolling in it. Maybe Rob can finally buy me that new car I asked for." "Do not touch those," I snapped, moving forward to snatch the papers away from her. "Touchy, touchy," she sneered, holding her hands up in mock surrender. "Fine, I am just going to use the bathroom before I go." Before I could stop her, she darted past me, heading straight down the hallway. But she did not go into the guest bathroom. She turned sharply into the master bedroom. I ran after her, the panic now a physical coldness spreading through my chest. I skidded into the bedroom just in time to see her standing in front of the open closet door. Her hands were on the heavy cardboard box containing my grandmother's belongings. She was pulling it down from the top shelf. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with pure terror. "Just looking for some of that old jewelry you said your grandma left you," Ashley replied casually, setting the box on the bed and flipping open the lid. "If you are taking out a huge loan, you obviously don't need it. I can pawn a few pieces. Rob will never know." She reached her hands deep inside the box. She was inches away from the heavy, leather-bound family Bible. She was inches away from uncovering the $73 million secret that was the only thing keeping me alive. The devoted, submissive wife vanished completely. A fierce, primal rage erupted from the deepest part of my soul. I lunged forward, grabbing Ashley roughly by the shoulder and yanking her away from the box with a strength that surprised both of us. She stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the dresser, her eyes wide with shock. "Are you crazy, Abigail? Let go of me!" "Do not ever touch my things again," I hissed, my voice dropping into a dangerous, lethal whisper. I stepped closer, invading her personal space, backing her aggressively into the corner of the room. "I know exactly what you are doing, Ashley. You are a thief." "I am not a thief," she shrieked, rubbing her shoulder defensively. "I am family." "You stole $300 from the pantry jar 2 years ago," I growled, taking another step toward her, so she had to turn her back on the bed and the open cardboard box. "You stole the silver earrings from my jewelry box last Christmas. And I know you stole Rob's spare credit card last month when he thought he lost it at the gym. If you do not walk out of this house right now, I am calling the police and pressing charges for breaking and entering." Ashley stared at me, completely stunned by my sudden, vicious aggression. She was used to the quiet, apologetic Abigail who never fought back. She opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer, unapologetic fury radiating from my eyes silenced her. "I am leaving," she muttered, her bravado shattering into nervous fear. She quickly grabbed her purse from the living room and practically ran out the front door, slamming it shut behind her. I stood in the silence of the bedroom, my chest heaving, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the dresser to stay upright. The close call was utterly terrifying. The ticket was not safe in this house. It was not safe from Rob's surveillance, and it was certainly not safe from Ashley's greedy snooping. I had to get the post-nuptial agreement signed immediately, or I was going to lose everything before the battle even truly began. I locked the diner at 2 o'clock in the morning, killed the neon sign, and then did not go home. I walked back through the empty dining room and slipped into the cramped, windowless back office. I sat down at the sticky wooden desk, wiggled the computer mouse to wake up the ancient monitor, and opened the graphic design software we normally used for printing the daily specials menus. My hands hovered over the plastic keyboard. Mr. Hayes, the ruthless trust attorney, had given me a very specific mission. I had to become a financial radioactive bomb. I had to design my own complete and utter ruin. I opened a blank digital canvas. I searched for templates of medical debt collection notices until I found one from a major regional hospital network right here in Ohio, copied their corporate logo onto the top of my page, and typed my full legal name underneath it in a rigid, unforgiving font, Abigail Miller. Then came the numbers, a past due balance of $48,500, and below it, in bright red, a final notice before wage garnishment and asset seizure. It looked terrifyingly real, but I knew my husband too well. Rob was an elite senior loan officer. He evaluated financial risk and scrutinized loan documents for a living. One single collection letter might look like a clerical mistake or a scam. A coordinated, overwhelming avalanche of debt, however, would look like a catastrophic reality. I spent 2 hours building 3 notices from 3 different fictional collection agencies, adding late fees, compounding interest, and legal threats copied straight off real debt collection websites. The dates progressed logically, a debt ignored and sold onward to increasingly vicious buyers over 3 years. I printed them on the heavy cardstock we used for the dinner menus. Then I brewed a cup of black tea and dragged the damp bag along the crisp edges, crumpled the pages, smoothed them out again, until they looked like mail a frightened woman had been carrying in the bottom of her purse for months. Total fabricated liability, $124,000. But fake paper was not enough to sell the illusion. I needed my actual bank account to reflect absolute poverty. I pulled out my cell phone and opened my personal banking application. Over 7 years of marriage, I had hidden away tiny fractions of my cash tips, $5 here, $10 there, on days when I skipped my own lunch just to have something that was solely mine. The balance on my glowing screen was $3,800. It was all the real money I had in the world. I wired every cent of it to my mother's checking account and texted her to hold it and not ask me why yet. Then I refreshed the page. Available balance, $0.00. On paper, I was completely destitute. I had nothing left to lose. I drove home as the sun began to bleed a pale, watery light over the horizon. The suburban neighborhood was dead quiet. The house was entirely silent when I slipped my key into the front door. Rob was still fast asleep in the master bedroom, likely dreaming of his offshore accounts and the luxury valley home he planned to buy with his 24-year-old mistress. I crept silently down the hallway and slipped into his meticulously organized home office. Every Friday morning, he maintained a strict, unbreakable routine. He would brew a double espresso, sit at his heavy mahogany desk, and sort through the weekly mail. It was his dedicated time to review our finances, his way of maintaining absolute fiscal control over our household. I took the most aggressive of the forged collection letters, the one threatening immediate asset seizure, and carefully slid it near the bottom of a stack of utility bills and credit card offers resting in the wire basket. I aligned the edges perfectly, placing the pile exactly in the center of his leather desk mat so he could not possibly miss it. Then, I retreated to the kitchen to wait. I brewed a pot of the cheapest generic coffee in the pantry, the same bitter blend I had been drinking the morning I found the winning numbers. Down the hall sat a piece of paper that could buy this entire neighborhood, and here I stood in my cheap work shoes, rehearsing bankruptcy. Whenever the guilt crept in, I made myself remember one line from those printed messages. Peasant mentality. It worked every time. At 8:30, the master bedroom door creaked open. Firm, confident footsteps padded down the hardwood hallway. Rob did not glance into the kitchen to say good morning. He walked straight into his office and pushed the door halfway shut. I gripped the cold edge of the granite counter and counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Abigail. The roar shattered the quiet morning like a heavy stone thrown through a pane of glass. It was not his usual condescending, irritated tone. It was a visceral, panicked bellow that made the floorboards vibrate. I forced my breathing to become rapid and shallow. I dropped my shoulders, rounded my back, and instantly adopted the posture of a terrified, cornered animal. I walked slowly toward the office doorway, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards. Rob was standing behind his large desk. The healthy color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His hands were shaking violently as he gripped the forged collection letter. The thick veins in his neck throbbed against his collar. "What is this?" he screamed, slamming the heavy cardstock down onto the leather desk mat with incredible force. "What the hell is this, Abigail?" I took a small, trembling step backward, widening my eyes in practiced terror. "Rob, I can explain," I stammered, letting my voice crack and falter perfectly. "Explain!" he shouted, storming around the edge of the desk. He snatched the letter up again and shoved it mere inches from my face. "This is a final collection notice for $48,000. It says they are preparing to file a lien against this property. Are you completely insane? Do you have any idea what this means?" I let the hot tears fall. They were surprisingly easy to summon. The sheer physical exhaustion of working double shifts at the diner, the profound psychological betrayal of reading his text messages, the terrifying weight of hiding a $73 million secret. It all fueled a very real, incredibly intense emotional breakdown. I just took all of that genuine, suffocating pain and directed it entirely into the lie. "I am so sorry," I sobbed loudly, covering my face with my trembling hands. "It was the hospital bills from when my appendix ruptured 3 years ago. The cheap insurance from the diner did not cover the emergency surgery or the extended stay. The interest just kept growing and growing every single month. I did not know what to do." "3 years!" he shrieked, his voice reaching a hysterical, high-pitched crescendo. "You have been hiding a massive, toxic medical debt for 3 years. Do you know what this will do to my immaculate credit score if they attach a lien to this house? Do you know what this will do to my career at the bank?" I collapsed to my knees right there on his expensive Persian rug, wrapping my arms around my stomach. "There is more," I whimpered softly into the carpet. Rob froze completely. The silence in the room became incredibly heavy, suffocating all the oxygen out of the space. "What do you mean, there is more?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper that sent a real shiver down my spine. I reached into the deep pocket of my oversized knit cardigan and pulled out the other 2 forged letters. I held them up with a shaking hand, offering them to him like a desperate plea for mercy. They sold the original debt to different, highly aggressive collection agencies, I cried out. They added severe penalties and default fees. It is over $120,000 now, Rob. They said they are going to garnish my wages at the diner. They said they might come after our home equity to satisfy the balance. Rob snatched the letters from my grasp and read the total aloud to himself, barely above a whisper, as if saying it would make it real. $124,000. He flipped to the second page, then the third, his breathing shallow and erratic. I could see him running the debt-to-income ratio in his head, and I could see the answer arriving. I watched his eyes dart frantically across the bold black print. I watched the exact moment the realization physically hit him. The smug arrogance, the absolute certainty of his brutal plan to saddle me with a massive home equity line of credit evaporated into thin air. In his greedy mind, I was no longer the gullible, useful victim he could exploit for quick cash. I was a toxic, financial hand grenade that had just detonated squarely in his pristine, carefully curated life. He staggered backward, his hips hitting the heavy wooden edge of his desk. He looked down at me with unadulterated terror. "You stupid, worthless peasant," he hissed, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "You ruined everything. I am an elite executive loan officer, and my wife is facing asset seizure for six-figure medical debt. If the board of directors finds out about this, my entire career is completely finished." I hid it because I was terrified of how angry you would be, I sobbed, crawling forward and grabbing the hem of his silk pajama pants. "You manage all our money so perfectly. I was so ashamed." He kicked his leg violently to break my grip, and I fell backward onto the rug. "But we are married!" I cried out, staring up at him with wide, pleading eyes. Your name is already attached to me." That was the kill shot, the exact trigger Mr. Hayes had predicted. Because we were legally married, my fabricated debt was automatically his problem. Creditors could pursue the joint accounts. They could put a lien on the very house he was planning to strip. Rob stopped screaming. He did not offer a single word of comfort to his weeping wife on the floor. He simply turned his back on me, grabbed his cell phone from the desk charger, and frantically dialed a number. "I need an emergency appointment with the legal team," he said into the receiver, his voice shaking with absolute panic. "Today. Yes, it is incredibly urgent. I need to sever my financial liabilities immediately." I stayed on the floor, my face buried in my hands, crying loudly into the quiet room. But beneath the shelter of my fingers, a cold, sharp smile touched my lips. The bait had been swallowed whole. Rob ended the call with a vicious jab of his finger against the screen. He did not help me up. He paced the study, running both hands through his perfectly styled hair, and looked down at me the way a man looks at a diseased animal that has wandered into his house. "Get up," he snapped. "Stop your pathetic crying and get up right now." I slowly pushed myself off the floor, wiping my face with the back of my hand, keeping my eyes fixed on the baseboards. I made sure my shoulders were slumped, playing the role of the defeated, guilty wife to absolute perfection. "What are we going to do, Rob?" I asked, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "Are you going to help me talk to the collection agencies?" "Help you!" he shouted, letting out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the walls. "You are completely delusional, Abigail. You think I am going to dip into my hard-earned savings to bail you out of a $124,000 medical debt because you were too stupid to understand compound interest? I am an executive loan officer. If my name gets legally dragged into your financial mess, my entire career will be obliterated. But the home equity loan," I stammered, wrapping my arms around my waist as if trying to hold myself together. "You said we needed to sign the papers for the home renovations. We could use some of that money to pay them off. I will work extra shifts at the diner. I promise I will pay you back every single penny." Rob stormed over to the kitchen island, where the thick stack of loan documents still sat. He grabbed the entire stack with both hands and ripped the pages right down the middle, throwing the torn halves violently into the stainless steel trash can. "There is no home equity loan," he growled, his face red with pure fury. "I am canceling the application immediately. Do you honestly believe I am going to pull equity out of this house and hand you a massive check so you can hand it over to a debt buyer? The bank would see the lien on your credit report before the ink was even dry. They would freeze everything. You have officially ruined our plans." I looked away, hiding the immense, staggering relief washing over me. Mr. Hayes was an absolute genius. The terrifying threat of my fake debt had completely neutralized Rob's plan to steal the equity of our home and run away with Brittany. The trap he had meticulously set for me was now sitting in torn pieces at the bottom of the garbage. I sniffled loudly, covering my face again. "I am so sorry," I cried out loudly. "What happens now?" "What happens now is that we are going to fix this legal liability before it destroys my life," Rob commanded, pointing a rigid finger at my chest. "I just spoke to my attorney on the phone. We are going to his office at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and you will be there if I have to drag you. You are going to sign a post-nuptial separation of assets agreement." "A post-nuptial agreement," I repeated softly, acting as though I had never heard the term before in my entire life. "What does that mean, Rob?" "It means we are legally separating our finances entirely," he explained, his tone condescending and sharp. "It means your debts remain entirely your problem. The ruthless creditors will not be allowed to touch my income, my savings, or my future assets. I am cutting you loose financially, Abigail. You dug this massive hole all by yourself, and you are going to sit in it completely alone." I nodded weakly, keeping my head bowed towards the floor. "Okay, Rob," I whispered, "if that is what you want." "It is not what I want. It is what is absolutely necessary to save my professional reputation, he snapped, grabbing his heavy leather briefcase from the counter. Wash your face and put on something decent. I will not have you looking like a greasy diner cook when we meet with my legal team today. The drive to downtown Columbus was the longest 45 minutes of my life. Rob gripped the steering wheel with both hands, jaw clenched, and did not turn on the radio or say a single word to me. Every mile carried me closer to the ticket. We pulled into the underground garage of a towering glass building, nothing like the discreet office where Mr. Hayes worked. This was a firm built specifically to make people feel small. Rob walked briskly to the elevator, not once looking back to see if I was keeping up with him. I hurried behind him, the heels of my cheap black shoes clicking rapidly against the polished marble floor of the grand lobby. A receptionist greeted Rob by name and ushered us into a freezing, glass-walled mediation room. At the head of the long mahogany table sat a man in a sharp gray suit who looked like an older, more cynical version of my husband, and who looked at me with open disdain as we walked in. Abigail, this is Mr. Sterling, Rob said briskly, taking a seat and gesturing for me to sit across from him. He is the senior partner here. I took a seat, crossing my ankles and resting my hands nervously in my lap. Hello, I said quietly. Mr. Sterling did not offer a polite greeting. He simply opened a thick, leather-bound folder and pulled out a stack of crisp, white legal documents. Let us get straight to the point, Mrs. Miller, the lawyer began, his voice deep and authoritative. Your husband has informed me of the catastrophic financial liabilities you have hidden from him during your marriage. Withholding over $120,000 in aggressive medical debt is a severe breach of marital trust. Frankly, Robert has every right to file for divorce right this second, based entirely on your financial infidelity. I let a small gasp escape my lips, looking at Rob with wide, pleading eyes. Please do not divorce me, I begged, letting my voice crack perfectly with fake emotion. I love you, Rob. I just made a terrible mistake. Rob refused to meet my gaze. He stared at the documents on the table, maintaining his role as the deeply wounded, highly responsible husband. He thought he was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, completely unaware that he was playing directly into my hands. Robert is a generous man, Mr. Sterling continued, tapping his expensive gold pen against the polished wood table. He is willing to remain in this marriage, but only under the strict condition that his financial future is permanently insulated from your catastrophic mistakes. Therefore, I have drafted a comprehensive post-nuptial separation agreement. This document will legally sever your financial ties completely. It overrides any standard equitable distribution laws in the state of Ohio. I nodded slowly, pretending to be completely overwhelmed by the complex legal jargon. So, if I sign this document, my medical bills cannot hurt his credit score. Exactly, the lawyer said smoothly, but it goes much further than that. I want you to turn to page 7, section 4. He pushed a copy of the thick contract across the wide table toward me. I flipped the heavy pages, my heart pounding a steady, frantic rhythm against my ribs. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs until I found the specific clause Mr. Sterling had mentioned. Read it carefully, Mrs. Miller, the lawyer commanded. I read the words slowly, savoring the incredible, absolute perfection of the legal phrasing. The clause stated that each party retains sole ownership of any and all undisclosed personal assets, accounts, debts, or future claims, completely waiving any legal rights to the other's property. It was flawless. Rob had paid a corporate lawyer thousands of dollars to draft the exact shield I needed, and he had done it purely out of greed. Does this mean we do not share anything anymore? I asked, looking up with fresh tears pooling in my eyes. It means what is his belongs only to him, and what is yours belongs only to you, Mr. Sterling clarified coldly. If you discover a hidden asset belonging to him tomorrow, you have absolutely zero legal claim to it whatsoever. Conversely, any hidden debts or future claims you possess belong entirely to you. You are permanently relinquishing your right to seek spousal support, division of property, or equity in his current holdings. Rob leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, finally looking me directly in the eye. His expression was hard and totally unforgiving. "Sign the paper, Abigail," he demanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "This is the only way I am staying in our house. If you do not sign this agreement right now, I am walking out that door, calling a real estate agent, and selling the house out from under you. You will be completely homeless by the end of the month, fighting off debt collectors from the street corner." I stared at him, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. The sheer arrogance of the man was astounding. He honestly believed he was holding all the cards in the deck. He believed he was dodging my fake $120,000 debt while brilliantly protecting the accounts he intended to use to buy a luxury property with Brittany. He thought he had outsmarted the legal system, outsmarted his gullible wife, and secured his golden future. He had no idea that the very moment I signed my name on that dotted line, he was legally, voluntarily, locking himself out of a $73 million fortune. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Rob?" I asked softly, giving him one final theatrical chance to change his mind. "We promised to share our lives together. We promised for richer or for poorer. Do not quote wedding vows to me after hiding a six-figure debt for 3 years," he snapped back, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet mediation room. "My financial future is not a charity for your complete incompetence. Pick up the pen and sign the document right now." I looked down at the thick stack of papers. My hand hovered over the heavy gold pen resting on the polished mahogany table. My fingers were trembling, but this time it was not from fear or exhaustion. It was from the massive, overwhelming surge of pure adrenaline rushing through my veins. I picked up the pen. It felt incredibly heavy, a solid instrument of my ultimate liberation. I turned to the final page, where a line of blank ink waited for my signature. I took a deep, shaky breath, letting out a soft sob for the benefit of my audience. Then, with deliberate, careful strokes, I signed my full legal name. Mr. Sterling pulled the document across the table, inspecting the signature with a critical eye. He then signed his own name as a witness and pressed a heavy notary stamp onto the bottom corner of the page. The metal stamp came down with a crunch, and the sound of it went through me like a chain snapping. The ink dried. I was permanently insulated. Rob let out a long breath and leaned back in his leather chair, the tension draining out of his shoulders, and gave his lawyer a smug, victorious smile. "Thank you for handling this on such short notice, Arthur," Rob said, his voice returning to its usual confident, arrogant tone. "I just needed to make sure my assets were totally secure before the end of the quarter." "It is my job, Robert," the lawyer replied, sliding the finalized agreement into a pristine manila envelope. "You are fully protected from any liabilities your wife brings into this marriage from this day forward." Rob stood up from the table, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He did not look at me with anger anymore. He looked at me with complete and utter indifference. The terrifying crisis was averted in his mind. I was no longer a threat to his pristine credit score or his secret life with Brittany. I was simply an annoyance he had successfully managed to neutralize. "Go warm up the car, Abigail," he ordered, tossing the heavy keys onto the table. "I need to discuss a few private matters with Mr. Sterling before we leave the office." I picked up the keys, my fingers wrapping tightly around the cold metal. "Of course, Rob," I said quietly, keeping my head bowed as I walked out of the glass-walled room. I stepped into the empty elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage. The heavy metal doors slid shut, cutting me off from the arrogant men in the mediation room. As the elevator descended, I watched my own reflection in the polished brass doors change. The frightened wife dissolved somewhere around the 20th floor. By the time the doors opened onto the parking garage, I was laughing out loud in an empty metal box, and the sound of it did not frighten me at all. He had paid his own lawyer to lock himself out of the vault. I sat alone in the freezing underground parking garage of the law firm for 19 minutes, the engine of Rob's luxury sedan idling softly, before he finally stepped out of the elevator. He slid into the driver's seat without a word of explanation and drove us out into the afternoon traffic. He did not speak once during the entire ride back to our suburb. When he reached our street, he did not pull into the driveway. He stopped at the curb, reached across my lap, and pushed my door open. "Get out," he said, staring straight through the windshield. "I have to go back downtown. Sterling and I have private business to finish, and it does not concern you anymore." I stepped onto the hot pavement and watched his taillights disappear around the corner. Then I walked up my own front path, pushed my brass key into the door lock, and let the heavy wooden door swing open. I froze instantly in my tracks. Ashley was sitting casually on my living room sofa, her muddy boots resting right on top of the glass coffee table, flipping lazily through a fashion magazine. The room was a complete disaster. Several of my decorative pillows were thrown onto the floor, and the drawers of the entryway console table were pulled wide open, their contents rummaged through and carelessly tossed aside. "Rob gave me a spare key 2 Christmases ago," she said smoothly, not even bothering to look up from the glossy pages. "He told me to check on the house whenever you two were out." I dropped my purse onto the entryway bench, a cold spike of adrenaline shooting directly into my veins. "What are you doing back inside my house, Ashley?" I asked, my voice tight and commanding. "Rob is not here. You need to leave immediately before I call the police." She finally closed the magazine and tossed it aside, offering me a saccharine, entirely fake smile. "Oh, I know my brother is not home. He is still at the law firm finishing up that little separation agreement you two signed. But I am not here to see Rob. I am here to talk to you about a very interesting message I saw earlier." I patted my pockets frantically. My cell phone was missing. I had left it sitting on the kitchen island when Rob dragged me out to the law firm in such a hurry. I walked briskly into the kitchen and saw my phone sitting exactly where I left it, but it was slightly angled, completely out of its original position. Ashley followed me into the kitchen, a smug, greedy smile spreading across her heavily made-up face. "Your screen lit up while I was sitting on the sofa," she said, drawing the words out slowly, enjoying every syllable. "A man named Mr. Hayes. Something about your asset protection trust being finalized shortly. Funny thing for a broke waitress with $100,000 in medical bills to be receiving, do you not think so?" The air completely vanished from my lungs. The post-nuptial agreement we just signed had a mandatory legal waiting period before the court formally registered the separation of assets. If Rob discovered the existence of Mr. Hayes and the hidden trust before that waiting period cleared, he could instantly file a motion to halt the separation. He would hire a private investigator, dig into the trust, and uncover the $73 million lottery ticket sitting quietly inside my grandmother's Bible down the hall. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island to keep my knees from buckling under the terrifying weight of that possibility. I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath, trying to project an aura of total boredom. "You have completely misunderstood the message," I lied, forcing my breathing to remain steady and shallow. "Mr. Hayes is just a bankruptcy consultant. He is helping me figure out how to handle my medical debts." Ashley threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the kitchen cabinets. "Do not play dumb with me, Abigail. I know exactly what you are doing. You are hiding your grandmother's jewelry inside some fancy legal trust so the collection agencies cannot touch it. That is what asset protection means. I looked it up on my phone before you got home." She crossed her arms over her chest, tapping a manicured finger against her arm. "So here is my price for keeping my mouth shut. $10,000 in cash. You let my brother panic about a $120,000 medical debt while you are sitting on a hidden pile of gold and diamonds. If I call Rob right now and tell him you are legally hiding inherited assets behind his back, he will absolutely destroy you. He will tear this house apart looking for whatever you are hiding. He will rip up the floorboards if he has to." My mind raced through a dozen different terrifying scenarios, and every single one of them ended with Rob standing in a courthouse hallway beside a private investigator. I stared at my sister-in-law, a woman willing to extort her own family for a quick payday. Her entitlement was absolutely suffocating. "I do not have $10,000 in cash sitting around the house," I said truthfully, keeping my voice incredibly flat. "I transferred all my small savings to my mother yesterday to make my bank accounts look completely empty." Ashley waved her hand dismissively, clearly entirely unsympathetic to my supposed poverty. "Figure it out. Go pawn a piece of that hidden jewelry. Go take out a payday loan. I do not care how you get it. Have the cash in a thick envelope tonight. Do not make me wait, Abigail, or my brother gets a very interesting phone call." I let my shoulders drop and my voice go small and defeated, exactly the way she expected it to sound. "Fine," I whispered. "I work the closing shift tonight. Come to the diner at 11 o'clock, after the dinner crowd clears out, and sit in the back corner booth. I will have your envelope waiting." Ashley smiled brightly, grabbed her knockoff purse off my sofa, and let herself out through my front door as if she owned the building. I drove to the diner for my evening shift, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the steering wheel of my rusted sedan. The bright neon sign buzzing over the parking lot cast long yellow shadows across the wet asphalt. I tied my stained apron around my waist, grabbed my order pad, and threw myself into the dinner rush. Every muscle in my body ached, but the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the mental gymnastics I was performing. I carried heavy trays of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, refilled endless cups of black coffee, and wiped down sticky booths while my brain methodically plotted my counterattack. There would be no envelope of cash waiting for Ashley in that back corner booth. There would be something far more permanent. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and tested the voice recording application in the diner's cramped back office. I placed the phone deep inside the front pocket of my apron, ensuring the microphone was pointing upward and completely unobstructed by the thick fabric. At exactly 11 o'clock, the bell over the glass front door chimed loudly, cutting through the low hum of the refrigerators. Ashley walked into the diner wearing a cheap faux fur coat and oversized sunglasses, looking entirely out of place among the tired truck drivers and late-night shift workers. She slid into a red vinyl booth in the far back corner, far away from the large front windows, clearly trying to act like a cinematic villain. I poured a glass of ice water and walked over to her table. I slid into the booth across from her, keeping my hands resting flat on the scratched Formica tabletop. "Where is the envelope?" Ashley demanded immediately, leaning forward and lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. I tapped my finger against the table, maintaining a perfectly blank expression. "I need you to confirm exactly what this money is buying me, Ashley. I want to be absolutely clear about our arrangement before I hand over a single dollar." She rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic sigh of annoyance, clearly frustrated by my insistence on details. "We already went over this at the house, Abigail. You give me $10,000 in cash right now, and I promise I will not tell Rob about your secret asset protection trust. I will not tell him you are hiding grandmother's jewelry to avoid paying your massive medical debts. You get to keep your little secret, and I get a new car down payment. It is a very simple transaction." I leaned closer, making sure my apron pocket was practically touching the edge of the table. "And if I refuse to pay you the $10,000 tonight, what exactly will you do, Ashley?" She slammed her hand flat against the tabletop, causing the glass of ice water to rattle loudly, spilling a few cold drops onto the Formica. "If you refuse to pay me, I will call Rob and tell him everything. He will hire a lawyer to rip your hidden trust apart. He will divorce you and leave you with nothing. Now hand over the cash before I lose my patience." I sat back against the red vinyl cushion. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the same smile I wore when I watched Rob tear up the home equity loan documents earlier that afternoon. I reached into my apron pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and placed it right in the center of the table. The screen was glowing brightly, displaying the red recording wave fluctuating with every single sound in the quiet diner. I tapped the red square to stop the recording and pressed save. The audio file was instantly uploaded to a secure cloud server managed by Mr. Hayes. Ashley stared at the glowing screen, the smug confidence completely melting off her face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. "What is that?" she stammered, pulling her hands back into her lap as if the phone might physically burn her. "What are you doing?" I folded my hands together on the table, leaning forward to deliver the final blow. "You just explicitly demanded $10,000 under the direct threat of exposing my private financial information to ruin my marriage. In the state of Ohio, that is not a simple misdemeanor, Ashley. That is felony extortion, also known as blackmail. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 1 to 5 years in a state penitentiary." I watched her swallow hard, her eyes darting frantically toward the front door of the diner. "You would not dare go to the police," she whispered, her voice cracking with genuine terror. "If you go to the police, Rob will find out about your hidden assets anyway. You would be destroying yourself just to get me arrested." I picked up the glass of ice water and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You are severely underestimating how little I care about what Rob thinks anymore. I do not care if Rob finds out about the trust tomorrow. The medical debts are already in collection. He has already legally separated our finances. The worst thing he can do is yell at me. But you, Ashley." I pointed a rigid finger directly at her chest, my voice dropping into a lethal, uncompromising register. "If you breathe a single word of this to anyone, I will walk straight into the local police precinct and hand this recording directly to a detective. I will press full criminal charges. You will be arrested at your apartment. You will be handcuffed in front of your neighbors. You will sit in a cold concrete jail cell while my lawyer ensures you get the maximum possible sentence. And I promise you, Rob will not spend a single dime of his precious savings on your bail money." Ashley slid frantically out of the red vinyl booth, her hands shaking so badly she knocked over the salt shaker, sending a spray of white crystals across the table. She did not say another word. She grabbed her cheap designer knockoff purse and practically ran toward the front door, pushing it open and fleeing into the dark parking lot. I sat in the quiet booth, listening to the chime of the bell fade into the hum of the refrigerators. I had successfully neutralized the immediate threat, but the adrenaline crashing through my system left me feeling physically exhausted. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my apron pocket. The victory was necessary, but it did not change the terrifying reality of my situation. I looked up at the digital clock, glowing neon red above the diner kitchen doors. It was exactly midnight. Ashley had found the trust in 4 minutes of snooping on a locked screen. A man who tracked my grocery receipts for 7 years would find it faster, leaving $73 million inside a hollowed-out Bible in a house controlled by that man was absolute madness. The ticket had to be in a bank vault before the sun went down again. The morning sun cast long, harsh shadows across the kitchen linoleum, but the entire house felt as cold as a commercial meat freezer. Rob was standing by the coffee maker, staring at me with a sharp, calculating intensity that made the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. He had spent the entire morning watching my every single move. His paranoia was growing rapidly, spreading through the house like a dark, toxic stain. Ever since we signed the separation agreement at the law firm, he expected me to be a weeping, shattered mess. He expected me to be paralyzed by the massive medical debt I had fabricated. Instead, I was standing at the kitchen island, calmly buttering a piece of cheap white toast. My steady hands and quiet, resolved demeanor were completely throwing him off balance. He poured his dark coffee into a travel mug and leaned his weight against the granite counter, blocking my path to the hallway. "Why are you so calm this morning, Abigail?" he asked, his voice low and heavily laced with suspicion. "You are facing total bankruptcy and wage garnishment, yet you seem perfectly fine. Are you hiding something else from me?" I forced my shoulders to slump forward immediately, reverting to the broken, terrified wife persona he demanded to see. "I am just incredibly tired, Rob," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards to hide any trace of defiance. "I cried all night long in the guest room. I do not have any energy left to fight with you or the debt collectors. I am just going to go to the diner and work my double shift. I need the hourly pay and the tips more than ever now," he sneered, taking a slow sip of his scalding coffee. "Good. You need to work hard and fix your own mistakes. Just remember that your financial disaster is entirely your own problem now. The legal papers are signed and filed. And do not even think about doing anything stupid or trying to run away from your creditors. I am tracking your cell phone location through our shared family data plan. If you try to go to a bankruptcy lawyer or meet with a shady loan shark behind my back, I will know exactly where you are standing at all times." A sudden, freezing chill shot straight down my spine, settling heavily in my stomach. He was tracking my phone. The absolute, suffocating arrogance of this man was staggering. He was treating me like a prisoner out on parole. However, his arrogant need for total surveillance was also a fatal blind spot that I could use directly against him. He grabbed his leather briefcase and left for the bank at 8 o'clock sharp, his luxury sedan pulling out of the driveway with a smooth, expensive purr. I stood by the window and watched him leave, mapping out my exact schedule for the day. The daily lunch rush at the diner always peaked between noon and 1 o'clock. During that specific hour, the sheer chaos of clattering porcelain plates, screaming line cooks, and demanding customers would provide the absolute perfect cover. Rob knew I never had a second to check my phone during the heavy lunch rush. That gave me exactly a 45-minute window to retrieve the physical lottery ticket from the hidden family Bible and get it secured inside a bank vault. At exactly 12:15 in the afternoon, the diner was packed to maximum capacity with hungry truck drivers and local office workers. The noise in the dining room was deafening. The smell of frying bacon and hot coffee filled the air. I walked briskly into the cramped, windowless back management office. I pulled my cell phone from my grease-stained apron pocket and plugged it directly into the wall charger resting right on top of my wooden desk. The screen glowed brightly, locking my GPS location firmly at the diner address. I grabbed my rusted car keys, slipped quietly out the heavy metal back door near the garbage dumpsters, and ran across the scorching asphalt to my old sedan. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs as I forced the key into the ignition. Every single traffic light on the route felt like it was deliberately turning red just to slow me down. The drive back to my own suburban neighborhood took 12 agonizing minutes of pure sweating terror. I parked my car 2 streets away from my house, hiding the rusted vehicle carefully behind a tall, thick row of manicured cedar hedges. I walked the remaining distance entirely on foot, sticking to the dark shadows cast by the large, mature oak trees lining the neighborhood sidewalk. The intense Ohio summer heat was deeply oppressive, but my skin was covered in a cold, clammy sweat. I approached my house from the backyard, stepping meticulously over the soft grass to avoid snapping any dry twigs or making a sound. I pulled my spare brass house key from the pocket of my uniform trousers and approached the back patio door. I slid the cold metal key into the lock and turned it as slowly and quietly as humanly possible. The heavy glass door clicked open with a soft thud. I stepped inside, greeted by the cool, air-conditioned silence of my own hallway. I took one single step toward the hall closet, intending to grab the box right away, but my entire body froze completely solid. My breath caught sharply and painfully in my throat, choking off my air supply. Mounted high on the newly painted drywall, pointing directly at the closet door, was a brand new Ring security camera. A tiny, unblinking blue light indicated that the device was powered on and actively monitoring the space. Rob had installed it recently. He had secretly mounted a motion-activated surveillance camera inside our own home just to watch my movements. If I took one more step forward into the hallway, the highly sensitive motion sensor would trigger an immediate, glaring alert on his cell phone screen. He would see me standing inside the house while my GPS tracker explicitly told him I was miles away, working at the diner. The entire post-nuptial shield we had built would collapse into dust before the ink was even fully registered with the county court. Pure, unadulterated panic squeezed my chest like a tightening iron band. I pressed my back hard against the hallway corner, hiding myself desperately just outside the camera's wide-angle field of view. I closed my eyes tightly, visualizing the exact architectural layout of my home. The camera pointed straight down the main corridor, easily covering the closet door and the front entryway. But the wide-angle lens could not see around the corner into the adjacent mudroom. The mudroom had a small, rectangular ventilation window that opened directly into the side yard, positioned right next to the interior wall of the hall closet. If I could get back outside, pry open that specific mudroom window, and crawl through the frame, I could reach the closet door entirely from a blind spot. I silently backed out of the sliding patio door, easing the heavy glass shut until the latch clicked into place without a sound. I ran around the brick perimeter of the house, my cheap, non-slip work shoes skidding on the dry, sun-scorched grass. I reached the narrow side of the house and located the small mudroom window. It was positioned high up on the exterior wall, meant only for letting out wet shoe odors. I stood on my tiptoes, pressing my bare hands flat against the hot glass pane. It was securely locked from the inside, but I knew the metal latch mechanism was incredibly old and rusted. I ran to the small gardening shed nearby and grabbed a sturdy, thick-handled flathead screwdriver from the workbench. My hands were shaking violently as I jammed the sharp metal tip directly under the wooden window sash. I pushed upward with every single ounce of physical strength I possessed. The old, swollen wood groaned loudly in protest, creating a terrifying sound that echoed clearly in the quiet, empty neighborhood. I gritted my teeth and pushed even harder, ignoring the sharp, burning pain radiating up my forearms and wrists. With a sudden, violent crack, the rusted metal lock snapped completely, and the window slid forcefully upward. The open gap was incredibly narrow and uninviting. I hauled my body upward, balancing my stomach painfully on the rough, splintered wooden sill. The physical exertion demanded everything from my exhausted muscles. I squeezed my shoulders forcefully through the tight wooden frame, feeling my diner uniform shirt tear loudly as it caught on an exposed iron nail. I tumbled forward into the house, landing heavily and awkwardly on the hard ceramic tiled floor of the mudroom. I bit down hard on my lower lip until I tasted the sharp tang of copper blood, desperate to keep myself from crying out in sudden pain. My knees throbbed with fresh, dark bruises, and my breathing sounded like ragged gasps in the quiet room, but I was finally inside the blind spot. I stayed incredibly low to the ground, practically pressing my chest flat against the cold ceramic tiles. I crawled slowly and methodically out of the mudroom and into the edge of the hallway, keeping my entire body strictly beneath the camera's elevated line of sight. The glowing blue light positioned high above me felt exactly like the unblinking eye of a dangerous predator waiting to strike. I reached the wooden baseboard of the hall closet. I carefully reached up, turned the round brass knob with agonizing slowness, and pulled the heavy door open just a few inches. The familiar dusty smell of old winter coats and damp cardboard washed over my face. I reached my right arm up toward the top shelf. My trembling fingertips blindly searched the dark space until they brushed against the rough, worn edge of my late grandmother's cardboard storage box. I gently gripped the cardboard and pulled the heavy box down toward me, balancing it precariously on my bruised knees to prevent it from dropping and making a loud thud. My heart was beating so aggressively in my ears that I was absolutely certain the sensitive microphone on the camera would pick up the rhythmic thumping sound. I folded back the cardboard flaps. Deep inside the box, resting securely beneath thick layers of old, faded family photographs, was the massive, leather-bound family Bible. I pulled the heavy book out, my hands sweating profusely. I opened the split, cracked binding right down the middle section. The small, fragile slip of thermal paper was still resting right there. The $73 million Mega Millions ticket sat perfectly intact, its bold, black printed numbers shining up at me like a beacon of absolute, undeniable salvation. I grabbed the ticket quickly, holding the thin paper tightly in my sweaty palm. I shoved the heavy Bible back into the cardboard box, pushed the box back up onto the top shelf, and closed the closet door, ensuring the latch clicked softly without echoing. I crawled backward immediately, retreating safely into the shadows of the mudroom. I hoisted my aching body up off the floor and squeezed myself back through the narrow, broken window frame, tumbling awkwardly out onto the hot, brittle grass of the side yard. I stood up quickly, pulled the window firmly shut, and tried to push the broken lock pieces together to hide the damage as best as I could. I brushed the dark soil and grass stains from my torn uniform pants and started running. I ran wildly down the suburban street, my lungs burning fiercely, until I reached my hidden sedan. I threw myself violently into the driver's seat, locked all the doors instantly, and stared breathlessly at the winning ticket safely secured in my hand. The physical evidence was finally out of that surveillance-filled house. I jammed my keys into the ignition and sped directly toward the downtown branch of the First National Bank. The ticking clock in my head was deafening and relentless. I had exactly 18 minutes left before the busy lunch rush ended and my diner staff started actively searching for their manager. I parked aggressively in the bank parking lot, marched straight through the heavy revolving glass doors, and walked directly to the teller station. I demanded to open their largest available safe deposit box immediately. The teller moved with an agonizing, frustrating slowness, meticulously typing my personal information into her computer terminal, asking me to provide 2 separate forms of government identification, and leisurely explaining the annual rental fees. I smiled broadly and nodded my head constantly, forcefully masking the screaming, panicked urgency echoing in my brain. Finally, she led me away from the lobby and into the highly secure, climate-controlled vault. The massive, thick steel door swung closed behind us, sealing us in quiet safety. She handed me a long, empty metal container and left me completely alone inside a private, windowless viewing room. I placed the fragile lottery ticket flat inside the dark metal box. I took a pen and quickly added a handwritten note containing Mr. Hayes' direct contact information and law firm address, just in case something terrible happened to me before the trust was legally finalized. I closed the metal lid, locked the box securely, slid the container deep into the vault wall, and turned my assigned brass key. The internal lock engaged with a heavy metallic clunk that I felt in my wrist bones. $73 million, sealed behind 2 feet of solid steel, in a room my husband did not know existed and could not open, even if he did. I practically sprinted out of the bank lobby and drove my car back toward the diner, completely ignoring the posted speed limits. I needed to get back to my phone before Rob checked his tracker again. But as I turned the corner onto the main avenue heading toward the restaurant, my eyes caught a terrifying sight. Pulling into the wide, paved driveway of the bank I had just exited mere minutes ago was a pristine, midnight blue luxury sedan. It was Rob. He was pulling into the commercial driveway to conduct his afternoon business. I stomped on my accelerator, speeding past the entrance just as his vehicle rolled to a complete stop near the front doors. If my transaction inside the vault had taken even 3 minutes longer, I would have walked directly out of the secure lobby and straight into my husband's line of sight, holding the key to a newly opened safe deposit box. I drove the rest of the way to the diner with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I pulled into the back alley just as the lunch rush chaos was finally beginning to die down. I slipped silently through the heavy metal back door, walked straight into the management office, and grabbed my cell phone off the charging cable. The screen displayed 1 o'clock exactly. There was not a single missed call or text message from Rob. The GPS tracker had completely fooled his surveillance, and my perilous mission had succeeded perfectly. The physical evidence of my massive wealth was finally secure, and the final, inevitable countdown to his complete public reckoning had officially begun. I wiped down the stainless steel diner counter for the very last time that week and opened the secure cloud server application on my cell phone. The synced messaging software from our home computer was still quietly feeding me every single detail of my husband's private life. Rob had spent the entire afternoon texting Brittany, laying out a master plan that was breathtaking in its sheer cruelty. His parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary with a lavish, private dinner party at the Oakwood Valley Country Club on Saturday evening. He had reserved the grand dining room, inviting 50 of their closest church friends, wealthy suburban neighbors, and his senior corporate banking colleagues. According to his arrogant messages, this was not simply a joyful celebration of his parents' long marriage. This was his chosen stage for my public execution. He typed out his strategy to his young mistress with gleeful, meticulous precision. He was going to stand up in front of the entire town elite, play the role of the devastated, financially betrayed husband, and reveal my fabricated six-figure medical debt to the shocked crowd. He planned to announce our immediate divorce publicly, cementing his status as a noble victim, while leaving me utterly disgraced, humiliated, and socially exiled from the community. He even instructed Brittany to wear her best cocktail dress and wait patiently in the leather armchairs of the country club lobby. Once he handed me the divorce papers and drove me out of the banquet hall in hysterical tears, he was going to walk straight out to the lobby, take her hand, and boldly introduce her to his parents as his fresh, financially responsible new beginning. He expected me to show up to the country club looking exactly like the broken, exhausted, destitute diner manager he despised. He wanted me in my usual faded black slacks and that tired, frayed beige sweater I had worn to every single family function for the past 7 years. He needed me to look like a desperate peasant, so his narrative of my incompetence would visually match my miserable appearance. I decided to forcefully deny him that satisfaction. I called my mother and asked her to wire back $1,100 of the savings I had parked in her account, the last real money I had in the world, and I walked into an upscale consignment boutique in downtown Columbus. I did not buy something overly flashy or inappropriate for a conservative anniversary dinner. I bought a stunning, floor-length tailored, emerald green silk gown that fit my body with absolute commanding perfection. The heavy material flowed elegantly around my legs, radiating a quiet, expensive confidence that I had never possessed before. I had my hair professionally styled into sleek, polished waves that cascaded down my back. I hired a professional makeup artist to completely erase the dark circles of exhaustion from under my eyes, highlighting my features with a sharp, flawless finish. When I finally looked in the full-length mirror, the tired, submissive Abigail was completely gone. Staring back at me was a powerful woman who possessed a $73 million secret and the lethal composure to match. On Saturday evening, I deliberately chose not to ride with Rob to the country club. I told him I had to finish a mandatory inventory count at the diner and would simply meet him there later. I timed my arrival perfectly. At 7 o'clock sharp, the summer sun was sinking slowly below the manicured green hills of the golf course, casting a warm, golden light through the massive, arched windows of the club lobby. I handed the keys of my rusted 10-year-old sedan to the incredibly confused young valet and walked proudly through the heavy mahogany front doors. The grand lobby was lined with rich, dark wood paneling and smelled strongly of fresh lilies and expensive floor wax. Sitting in a plush velvet wingback chair near the coat check, staring impatiently at her glowing phone screen, was Brittany. She was wearing a tight, bright red dress that bordered on desperate, looking completely out of place among the country club decor. She did not even look up from her phone as I walked past her, completely unaware that the woman she was waiting to replace had just swept through the room like an unstoppable, quiet storm. I approached the grand dining room just as the elegantly dressed guests were finding their assigned seats around the large circular tables. The room was decorated beautifully with crisp white linen tablecloths, tall silver centerpieces filled with white roses, and glowing crystal chandeliers overhead. Rob was standing near the head table, holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch, laughing loudly with his senior bank manager and the head pastor of our local church. I walked up slowly behind him, my high heels completely silent on the thick, patterned carpet, and placed a gentle, delicate hand on his tailored shoulder. He turned around, the familiar, condescending remark already forming perfectly on his lips, but the cruel words died instantly in his throat. His eyes widened in absolute shock, taking in the emerald silk gown, the flawless professional makeup, and the absolute, unshakable confidence radiating from my upright posture. The glass of scotch in his right hand tilted dangerously, spilling a few cold drops of amber liquid directly onto his expensive, polished leather shoes. He was completely thrown off balance. His entire public script relied heavily on me looking like a defeated, pathetic, debt-ridden victim. Instead, I looked like a woman who could easily buy the entire country club in cash. "Hello, darling," I said softly, offering him a brilliant, flawless smile that did not reach my cold eyes. "I hope I am not too late for the opening prayer." Rob swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight silk collar. You look different," he stammered, his voice lacking its usual arrogant authority. "Where did you get that dress?" "We cannot afford luxury clothes right now, Abigail. You are completely drowning in medical collections." "I borrowed it from a friend at the diner," I lied smoothly, linking my arm affectionately through his rigid arm. "I wanted to look my absolute best for your parents' special milestone. We should go sit down. Everyone is watching us." The dinner service was agonizingly tense. The catering staff moved silently around the room, serving courses of roasted tenderloin and buttery asparagus, but I could barely taste a single bite of the rich food. I sat perfectly upright next to Rob at the head table, surrounded by his family and their influential friends. Rob was sweating profusely, frequently wiping his brow with a white linen napkin. His leg bounced anxiously under the table, vibrating the silver cutlery resting next to my plate. He kept stealing sideways glances at me, trying to decipher my sudden, unnatural calm. I played the role of the devoted, loving wife with terrifying perfection. I smiled warmly at his mother, complimented his father on his brief welcome speech, and engaged in polite, meaningless conversation with the senior bank partners sitting across from us. Every time Rob tried to bring up finances or steer the conversation toward personal responsibility, a clear setup for his upcoming speech, I smoothly redirected the topic toward the lovely flower arrangements or the beautiful golf course weather. I was completely suffocating his narrative, refusing to give him the frightened, guilty reactions he desperately needed to fuel his victim complex. The older couples at the table murmured approvingly about how lovely I looked and what a wonderful, supportive wife I was to a busy banking executive. The more they praised me, the redder Rob's face became. His frustration was bubbling violently just beneath the surface of his tailored suit. He knew Brittany was sitting out in the lobby, waiting for her grand entrance, and the carefully orchestrated timeline of his public triumph was slipping rapidly out of his control. I took a slow sip of my sparkling lauter, hiding my cold amusement behind the crystal rim. I knew exactly what was happening in his greedy, panicked mind. He was terrified that my calm demeanor meant I had somehow found a way out of the fake debt. He needed to strike now, before the dinner ended, to publicly lock me into the narrative of the financially ruinous wife. He needed the validation of his wealthy peers to justify throwing me away. As the catering staff quietly cleared the dinner plates and began distributing slices of decadent chocolate anniversary cake, the low hum of conversation in the ballroom settled into a comfortable, satisfied murmur. Then, Rob abruptly pushed his chair back from the head table, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the carpet. He reached for his empty crystal water goblet and picked up a heavy silver butter knife. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, high-pitched sound of the silver striking the fine crystal cut through the soft background music, instantly demanding the attention of every single person in the grand dining room. The 50 guests fell completely silent, turning their faces toward the head table with expectant, polite smiles. Rob stood up tall, buttoning the front of his suit jacket. He took a deep, theatrical breath, plastering a look of profound, heavy sorrow across his handsome face. He looked out at his parents, his church friends, and his banking colleagues, preparing to deliver the performance of his lifetime. I sat perfectly still beside him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, resting against the smooth emerald silk of my dress. My heart hammered a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I did not look away. I stared directly at the side of his face, watching the arrogant curve of his jaw as he prepared to destroy me. Family, friends, esteemed colleagues, Rob began, his voice projecting loudly and clearly across the silent ballroom, carrying a fake, trembling, emotional weight. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate 40 beautiful years of marriage between my wonderful parents. They have always taught me that the absolute foundation of any successful union is unwavering trust, transparency, and complete honesty in all matters. He paused dramatically, lowering his head for a brief moment, as if struggling to contain a massive wave of personal grief. The guests leaned in closer, sensing the sudden, heavy shift in the atmosphere. The celebratory mood evaporated, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable anticipation. I have always strived to live up to their shining example, Rob continued, his voice growing louder, dripping with righteous indignation and manufactured heartbreak. I have worked tirelessly to build a secure, respectable life for my household. I believed I was in a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. Unfortunately, the painful reality of my life has proven to be a devastating lie. Tonight, while we celebrate the beauty of true honesty, I must confess that my own marriage has been completely poisoned by unforgivable financial deceit. I felt the immense, electrifying power of absolute financial independence coursing deeply through my veins. The terrified, submissive diner manager he had financially abused for 7 long years was officially dead and buried. I was no longer the vulnerable prey caught in his malicious trap. I was the apex predator, calmly sitting right here at his table, patiently waiting for the exact right moment to entirely obliterate his pristine, carefully curated life. He turned his body, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. The 50 guests followed his gaze, their eyes locking onto me in shocked, breathless silence. Rob reached his right hand inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He gripped the thick, folded stack of finalized divorce papers, preparing to throw them down onto the white linen tablecloth and publicly reveal the massive, crushing debts I had supposedly hidden from him. He was completely ready to drop the ultimate bomb, completely unaware that he was standing on an active landmine of his own creation. The heavy crystal water goblet in my hand felt cool against my palm as I watched Rob reach into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope and dropped it directly onto the center of our table. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the fine linen tablecloth echoed loudly through the silent, expectant dining room. Every single eye in the country club was fixed on us. 50 guests held their collective breath, their elegant dinner plates completely forgotten. Rob cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie with a smug, practiced arrogance. "I am sorry to bring such unpleasant news to a celebration of love and commitment," he announced, projecting his voice so it reached even the furthest corners of the grand ballroom. "But true commitment requires financial transparency, and unfortunately, my wife has fundamentally broken that trust. She has been secretly hiding over $120,000 in aggressive medical debt from me. Debt she accumulated through sheer negligence and deceit." Loud, collective gasps rippled through the room. I watched his mother cover her mouth with a manicured hand. The head pastor of our church shook his head in solemn disappointment. The senior bank partners whispered to one another, shooting me glances of pure, unadulterated contempt. Rob soaked up their sympathy like a sponge. He stood taller, basking in his self-appointed role as the honorable, betrayed husband. Because of this unforgivable deception, Rob continued, his voice dripping with fake sorrow, I have made the agonizing decision to dissolve this marriage. I cannot anchor my hard-earned career and my future to someone who treats our financial security with such reckless disregard. Inside this envelope are the finalized divorce papers. We have already legally separated our assets, insulating me from her toxic liabilities. I am leaving this marriage to start fresh with a woman who actually respects my future, a woman who understands the value of honesty and hard work. As if on cue, the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Brittany walked in. She was wearing that tight, bright red cocktail dress, her heels clicking loudly against the polished wood floor as she strutted down the center aisle. She stopped right next to Rob, looping her arm through his with a victorious, sickeningly sweet smile. She looked down at me, her eyes flashing with pure arrogance, fully expecting me to burst into hysterical tears and run out the back door in absolute shame. But I did not cry. I did not run. I did not give them a single drop of the broken, humiliated reaction they so desperately craved. Instead, I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up perfectly straight. The emerald silk of my gown caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. I looked at Rob, then at Brittany, and then out at the sea of 50 silent, staring faces. A deep, settling calm washed over my entire body. It was the absolute, unshakable peace of a woman who knew she held the ultimate winning hand. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of defense, but a smile of pure, lethal victory. I reached down and picked up the heavy gold pen resting next to my dinner plate. I pulled the thick stack of legal documents out of the envelope and flipped directly to the last page. I did not need to read the fine print. I knew exactly what the papers said because I had meticulously pushed him into drafting them. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my full legal name with bold, sweeping strokes right there on the white linen tablecloth. I picked up the finalized divorce decree and handed it back to him. The ink was still wet. "Thank you, Rob," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Thank you for your absolute honesty tonight. You have just given me the greatest gift of my entire life." Rob frowned, his smug expression faltering for a fraction of a second. He snatched the papers from my hand, confused by my unnatural calm, but his greed quickly overrode his suspicion. He tucked the signed decree into his breast pocket, puffing out his chest, believing he had just successfully discarded his ruined wife and secured his freedom. I sat back down in my chair, picked up my sparkling water, and calmly reached into my small evening clutch. I pulled out my cell phone. The screen glowed brightly in the dim lighting of the ballroom. I opened my messages, selected Mr. Hayes, and typed 2 single words. "Do it." I hit send. The message delivered instantly. I slipped the phone back into my purse, took a slow sip of my water, and waited. The next 5 minutes were an agonizingly tense, beautifully drawn-out stretch of time. Rob was busy accepting sympathetic pats on the back from his banking colleagues, playing the brave survivor of a deceitful marriage. Brittany clung to his side, practically glowing with the satisfaction of having officially stolen my husband. The murmurs in the dining room grew louder, a mixture of uncomfortable gossip and judgmental whispers directed entirely at me. I sat there in total isolation at the head table, completely ignoring their stares. I watched the second hand on the large grandfather clock near the entrance ticking away. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The anticipation was a physical pressure building in my chest, a coiled spring ready to snap. I knew Mr. Hayes was sitting in his downtown office, holding the fully authenticated, legally binding trust documents that tied the $73 million Mega Millions ticket directly and solely to me. I knew he was communicating with the State Lottery Commission and the major news outlets. The post-nuptial separation of assets had completely cleared the mandatory waiting period earlier that afternoon. Rob had legally signed away his rights to all my undisclosed assets, and my signature on his divorce papers just moments ago had sealed the final lock. There was absolutely nothing he could do to touch my money now. At exactly 5 minutes past the hour, a strange, disjointed noise broke the low hum of conversation in the ballroom.
It started as a single, harsh buzz from a cell phone at a nearby table. Then, 2 more phones buzzed. Within seconds, a synchronized, piercing electronic alarm began to blare from every single purse, pocket, and jacket in the entire room. It was the sharp, unmistakable sound of a local emergency news alert, the kind of aggressive notification that overrides silent mode to announce severe weather or a missing child. 50 people simultaneously stopped talking and reached for their devices. The cacophony of alarms was deafening. Even Rob paused his conversation with the head pastor, pulling his expensive smartphone from his pocket with an annoyed sigh. Brittany peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in confusion. I did not check my phone. I simply folded my hands in my lap and watched the room. I watched as the senior bank partner at the table nearest to me looked down at his glowing screen. I saw his eyes widen to the size of saucers. His jaw dropped completely open, his breathing halting in his chest. I watched as Rob's mother stared at her phone, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her silver fork onto her china plate with a loud clatter. One by one, the expressions of judgment and pity directed at me morphed into absolute, unadulterated shock. A heavy, suffocating silence slammed down over the grand dining room. The alarms had stopped, leaving behind a quiet so profound you could hear a pin drop. "What does this mean?" the head pastor whispered, his voice trembling as he read the notification aloud.
Rob stared at his own screen. The healthy color drained from his face in a single, terrifying instant. His skin turned the color of old ash. His eyes darted frantically back and forth across the glowing text, reading the breaking news headline that had just been blasted to every resident in the state of Ohio. The headline read, "Anonymous $73 million Mega Millions winner finally comes forward." But it was the subhead, the bold text right beneath the breaking news banner, that carried the lethal payload. The article detailed that the historic jackpot had been claimed through a newly established legal blind trust, and it explicitly, undeniably, named the trust's sole legal beneficiary, Abigail Miller. Rob's breathing became shallow and erratic. His hands began to shake so badly the phone slipped from his fingers, tumbling through the air and landing face up on the carpet. He looked up slowly, his neck moving as if it were rusted tight. His terrified, bloodshot eyes locked directly onto mine. I sat there in my stunning emerald dress, looking back at him with absolute composure. I did not blink. I did not look away. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with the massive, crushing weight of reality. In that single, perfect moment, I watched the exact realization hit him like a speeding freight train. He remembered the post-nuptial separation agreement he had aggressively forced me to sign just days ago. He remembered the ironclad clause his own high-priced lawyer had drafted, the clause stating he permanently waived all legal rights to any of my undisclosed personal assets. He realized that his brilliant, arrogant plan to dodge my fake medical debt had just cost him exactly $36.5 million. He was standing on the landmine. And the text message I had just sent to my lawyer was the trigger that finally blew his entire world to absolute pieces. The air in the country club ballroom felt as though it had been instantly vacuumed out. The absolute stillness was terrifying. 50 pairs of eyes shifted slowly from their glowing phone screens directly to me, the woman they had just spent the last 20 minutes mentally condemning to poverty and social exile. They looked at my tailored emerald silk gown, the flawless professional makeup, the quiet, terrifying confidence radiating from my posture, and suddenly, my entire appearance made perfect, devastating sense. I was not a broken diner manager wearing borrowed clothes. I was a multi-millionaire sitting comfortably at the head table, watching my enemies orchestrate their own spectacular downfall. Rob tried to speak, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He opened his mouth, letting out a dry, choked gasp that sounded like a dying engine. He staggered backward, his hips hitting the edge of the long dining table, rattling the crystal glasses and silver centerpieces. His perfectly styled hair fell out of place as he gripped the edge of the tablecloth to keep his knees from completely buckling beneath him. Brittany, completely oblivious to the legal maneuvering that had taken place earlier in the week, stared at her own phone screen and let out a shrill, piercing shriek. $73 million, she screamed, her voice cracking with a mixture of shock and sudden greedy elation. She grabbed Rob's arm, shaking him violently. "Rob, she won the lottery. We won the lottery. You are still married. You get half. We get half." Her shrill, ignorant voice echoed loudly through the silent ballroom. It was the absolute worst thing she could have possibly said.
Rob ripped his arm away from her grasp, as if her touch burned his skin. He did not look at her. He kept his terrified, bloodshot eyes fixed entirely on me. His chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths. He raised a trembling hand, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "The separation agreement," he whispered, his voice a hoarse, broken rasp. "The waiver. You set me up." I smiled warmly, tilting my head slightly to the side. I did not say a single word. I simply let the silence confirm his worst fears.
He realized the entire sequence of events, the sudden onset of fake medical debt, the terrifying collection letters I had left on his desk, my theatrical tears on the living room floor. It had all been a meticulously calculated trap, a trap designed specifically to exploit his own arrogant greed. He had been so utterly terrified of being financially tied to my fake ruin that he had paid a corporate lawyer thousands of dollars to legally lock him out of my massive fortune. I had not fought him. I had simply stepped aside and allowed him to dig his own financial grave, hand me the shovel, and willingly jump right in.
The magnitude of his loss was physically destroying him right in front of my eyes. $36 million. It was a sum of money he could not even begin to comprehend, an amount of wealth that dwarfed his elite banking salary and his pathetic offshore accounts. He had traded a life of unimaginable luxury and absolute security for a heavily mortgaged suburban house and a 24-year-old junior realtor who was currently screaming about money that did not belong to her. He threw his hands to his head, gripping his hair with both fists. He let out a low, guttural sound that was not quite a word, a noise that made the guests at the nearest table flinch in their chairs. Then he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the finalized divorce decree, the one I had signed for him 20 minutes earlier on the white linen tablecloth, and he stared down at his own signature as though the ink might rearrange itself if he looked hard enough. It did not. I did not stand up. I did not gather my purse. I stayed exactly where I was, seated at the head table in my emerald silk gown, my hands folded in my lap, and I let him look at that piece of paper for as long as he needed to, because he had not understood it yet. Not fully. He was still doing arithmetic in his head, still hunting for the clause, the loophole, the phone call that would put it back the way it was. In about 4 seconds, he was going to run out of arithmetic, and when he did, 50 of the most important people in his life were going to watch it happen.
He ran out of arithmetic. The sound that came out of him was not a scream. It was lower than that, and worse, a raw animal noise torn straight out of his chest that made the crystal chandeliers seem to shiver above the tables. Rob dropped to his knees on the thick patterned carpet. He clawed at the white linen tablecloth, pulling it down along with crystal goblets, fine china, and heavy silver cutlery. The glass shattered violently against the floor, splashing cold water and dark red wine across his tailored suit pants, but he did not flinch. He tore the divorce decree in half, then stared at the two pieces in absolute horror at what he had just done, and immediately tried to press the torn, jagged edges back together on the wet carpet. His hands were shaking so aggressively that the thick papers kept slipping from his sweaty fingers.
He looked up at the ceiling, his face completely drained of color, except for the bright red veins throbbing in his neck, and screamed for someone to bring him tape. He screamed that his signature was a forgery, that he had been placed under emotional duress, and that the entire document was legally void. None of the 50 guests moved a single muscle to help him. The senior bank partners, the very men who had praised his financial brilliance 30 minutes ago, stepped backward in absolute disgust. The head pastor of our church lowered his head and turned his body away from the disgraceful spectacle. Rob was entirely isolated in the center of the dining room, drowning in the crushing reality of losing $36.5 million. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a terrifying panic. "Abigail, you have to rip that up," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine that echoed off the ceiling. "You cannot do this to me. We are a team. I was just trying to protect our shared assets from the medical debt. We can go home right now. I will cancel the divorce immediately. I will burn these papers in the fireplace. I will never speak to Brittany again. Please, Abigail, you are my wife." Before I could respond to his transparent lies, heavy footsteps echoed from the back of the ballroom. Mr. Hayes, my ruthless trust attorney, emerged from the shadows near the mahogany bar. He walked with slow, measured steps, carrying a sleek, black leather briefcase. Flanking him on either side were two massive private security contractors dressed in sharp black suits. They moved with silent, intimidating efficiency, stepping directly in front of me to form an impenetrable human wall between my body and my hysterical ex-husband. Mr. Hayes looked down at Rob with an expression of pure professional contempt. "The documents are legally binding, Robert," Mr. Hayes stated, his deep voice carrying easily across the room. "The post-nuptial separation agreement you demanded was formally registered and filed with the county court this afternoon. You voluntarily waived all rights to your former wife's undisclosed personal assets. And that divorce decree you are currently kneeling on was fully executed the moment she signed it, and you accepted it into your own hand. Tearing the paper changes nothing. The county has the filed copy." He set the sleek black briefcase down on the carpet, flicked open the brass latches, and lifted out a thick manila envelope. He held it up so the guests closest to the head table could see it clearly. "I would also advise you to think very carefully before you use the word forgery again in a room full of witnesses," Mr. Hayes continued, his voice never rising. "This envelope contains 42 pages of your own text messages, printed and time-stamped, in which you describe your plan to have your wife sign a home equity line of credit under false pretenses, wire the proceeds to an offshore entity registered in your girlfriend's name, and leave her legally responsible for the debt. My client has never had the slightest intention of filing them. That intention is contingent entirely on your silence." Rob stared at the manila envelope, and the last of the fight drained out of his body. He slumped backward against the base of the head table, his mouth opening and closing without sound, his chin coming to rest heavily on his chest. Suddenly, the rapid click of high heels broke the silence. Brittany pushed her way past the stunned guests and marched directly up to Rob. The bright red cocktail dress she wore now looked cheap and entirely out of place in the middle of this disaster. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted frantically between Rob and Mr. Hayes. "Rob, what is he talking about?" Brittany demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with rising panic. "What do you mean you waived your rights to her money? You told me she was broke and drowning in debt. You told me we were going to use the home equity loan to fund our offshore account. We just signed the contract for the Luxury Valley house yesterday afternoon. The seller expects the deposit on Monday morning. Where is the cash going to come from?" Rob looked up at his mistress, his face contorted with a vicious mixture of rage and exhaustion. "There is no money, Brittany," he yelled, his voice echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. "There is no home equity loan. The bank accounts are completely separated. I do not have a single penny of her millions. I am tied to a massive mortgage on that house. I still owe $42,000 on the car sitting in the parking lot outside. And every credit card in my wallet is running a balance I have been hiding from the bank." Brittany stared at him, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she processed his desperate words. The luxurious future she had envisioned, the hidden offshore accounts, the expensive shopping sprees, it all evaporated into thin air right before her eyes. She looked down at the man kneeling in the spilled water and broken glass, and her expression twisted into pure disgust. "You are completely broke?" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing loudly in the silent ballroom. "You dragged me into this massive mess, promised me the absolute world, and you are literally poorer than I am. You arrogant, stupid loser. I am not tying my youth to a bankrupt bank manager. You can pay for that luxury valley house all by yourself, because we are completely done." Without a moment of hesitation, Brittany threw her leather clutch over her shoulder, turned on her high heels, and marched straight toward the exit. Rob reached out, trying to grab the hem of her red dress, begging her to wait, but she kicked her foot out and ripped her fabric violently from his weak grasp. The heavy wooden doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind her, leaving Rob abandoned by the woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The sound of the slamming doors seemed to break the spell over the rest of Rob's family. His mother, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, burst into hysterical sobs. She threw herself onto the floor next to her ruined son, wrapping her arms tightly around his shaking shoulders. She wailed loudly, crying out about the shame and the ruin her family had just suffered in front of their church congregation. Ashley, my entitled sister-in-law, pushed her way aggressively to the front of the crowd. Her eyes were wide with a desperate, greedy light. She completely ignored her weeping brother and walked directly toward me, a sickeningly sweet, entirely fake smile plastered across her face. "Abigail, wait!" Ashley pleaded, holding her hands up in a gesture of fake surrender. "You know I always supported you behind closed doors. I always knew Rob was making a terrible mistake treating you like that. We are still family, right? You can still help me out with that new car down payment we talked about. I kept your secret about the jewelry. I proved my absolute loyalty to you." I looked at Ashley, marveling at the sheer, unfiltered audacity of her greed. I stepped calmly around the private security guards and closed the physical distance between us. I leaned in very close, dropping my voice to a lethal, quiet whisper that only she could hear over her mother's sobbing. "You tried to extort me for $10,000, Ashley," I whispered coldly. "I still have the digital audio recording of you committing a felony in that diner booth. If you ever speak to me again, if you ever ask me for a single dollar, or if you even look in my direction, I will hand that audio file directly to the district attorney and watch them lock you in a state penitentiary. Now back away from me before I lose my patience." Ashley gasped loudly, the fake smile melting completely off her pale face. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own high heels, and fell clumsily into the arms of a stunned country club waiter. She did not dare to say another word. I turned back to the center of the room. Rob was still crying on the wet floor, his mother rocking him back and forth like a wounded infant. The 50 guests stared at me in complete silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe, fear, and deep respect. I had entered this room as a victim marked for public execution, and I was leaving as the architect of their destruction. I calmly walked over to the head table and picked up my small, very elegant evening purse. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald green gown, ensuring there was not a single wrinkle. I turned to look at Rob one final time. He lifted his tear-stained face, his eyes begging for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. "Goodbye, Rob," I said clearly, my voice ringing out with absolute and total finality. "Enjoy the ruined life you built for yourself." I stepped carefully over his sprawling legs, avoiding the broken glass and spilled wine. I did not look back. Mr. Hayes and the 2 security guards formed a tight, protective escort around me as I walked down the long center aisle of the grand ballroom. The silent guests parted like the Red Sea, giving me a wide, respectful berth as I passed. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors and out into the quiet, carpeted lobby of the country club. The humid night air hit my face as I stepped through the front entrance. Pulling up to the curb, idling softly under the warm glow of the street lamps, was a sleek, pristine black town car. The uniformed driver quickly stepped out and opened the rear door for me, bowing his head respectfully. I climbed into the luxurious leather back seat, Mr. Hayes taking the seat up front. The heavy door closed with a solid, comforting thud, cutting off the noise and the chaos of the country club forever. The town car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly down the dark tree-lined road leading away from the country club. I leaned my head back against the cool, soft leather of the seat and closed my eyes. I took a long, deep breath, pulling the sweet, clean air of absolute freedom into my lungs. The heavy, suffocating scent of cheap diner grease, industrial bleach, and constant anxiety was completely gone. In its place was the crisp, quiet atmosphere of safety, security, and unimaginable wealth, peace, and quiet power. The ultimate sacrifice of my 20s had finally been repaid with the ultimate victory in my 30s. I had spent 7 long years shrinking myself down to fit into the tiny, miserable box Rob had meticulously built for me. I had handed over every single dollar I earned from double shifts, skipped my own meals to save pennies, and allowed him to convince me that I was a financially illiterate peasant. He had used my devotion as a weapon to fund his incredibly arrogant image, and when he was done using me, he tried to discard me into a pit of fraudulent debt. But tonight, the brutal truth had set me entirely free. The lesson I learned in that terrifying week is clear and absolute. You must never let financial abuse convince you that you are worthless. When a toxic partner tries to control your money, they are actively trying to control your mind, your daily options, and your future. They want you weak so they can remain powerful. But your kindness and your patience are not weaknesses. They are a deep well of resilience. And most importantly, when you realize an arrogant man is busy destroying his own life through sheer, unadulterated greed, you must never interrupt him. You simply step back, secure your own safety, gather your legal evidence, and let him walk directly into the fire he built with his own 2 hands. I looked out the tinted window as the bright city lights blurred past, knowing my new life was just beginning. I had $73 million safely secured in a blind trust, an ironclad legal shield protecting my future, and a wide-open horizon filled with endless, completely beautiful possibilities. I was finally the sole author of my own destiny, completely unbound by the chains of my past. If you enjoyed this story of the ultimate payback and watching a deeply greedy narcissist lose absolutely everything he values, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of justice served. I read every single comment, and I would love to know where my amazing, wonderful audience is tuning in from today. Let me know down in the comments exactly what city and what time you are watching this video from. Stay strong, protect your peace, never settle for less than you deserve, and I will see you in the next story.